What's the most disrespectful thing that someone's done in your home? A friend must have seen me once put in the code for my spare key lockbox, and I came home to her in my frickin' house. Mind you, we're not close. And what was her excuse? She had to go to the bathroom. Safe to say, I reset that crap and didn't invite her over anymore. It weirded me the frick out. My mum made a huge dinner for my aunt and cousins. They showed up 2 hours late, told my mum, "Oh, sorry, the boys can't eat that much right now," and just went to our fridge and made them sandwiches instead. She invited a bunch of sleazy guys over despite me asking her not to. She let them in while I was in the shower, so I didn't realize they were in my house. She then took one into my housemate's bedroom and locked the door, which was super disrespectful to my housemate who had so kindly offered to let her stay in her room as she was going to be at her boyfriend's for the weekend. And when I got out of the shower, one of the guys was in my bed. I was like, "Dude, get the frick out of my bedroom." And he refused and said my friend said he could stay here. I was very not okay with that. I physically had to push him out of my house. The next day, when she sobered up, I kicked her out of my house and didn't speak to her for 3 years. In what universe could someone think, "My friend said I could be here," trumps, "This is my bedroom, get out"? Constantly unplugging electronics. First, it was the thermostat. She didn't like the sound the water heater made. Then it was the Wi-Fi. The CIA was apparently snooping on her from it. And finally, my fridge. She said she was saving the environment. I did ask her to leave. She'd gone through my things and taken my ex's lease agreement, called the cops and claimed she lived there, in my house. It was a really messed up story. I did offer for her to stay as a guest for a few weeks, and then she slowly started taking over and going mad. While I was out, things would get unplugged, stuff would be moved, and I realized later, stolen, and on one day she had a storage company deliver more boxes of stuff than I own. I believe this was intentionally done right before I snapped, because she knew it would make her insane version more believable. Thankfully, I kept calm when dealing with the police, as I could easily prove that I owned the place. And one of them gave me great advice. Change the locks, refuse her entry and record everything as you pack her stuff, and be prepared for civil recourse. They mediated her entry to collect her crap, then when she couldn't keep herself composed, i.e. she started screaming swear words at me, they started to see this person unravel. Like she claimed I stole a wedding dress and was determined to find it in my place, and the police just told her to sue me for it, but they aren't there to help her scavenge my place. Just truly crazy. Boy, that one really escalated from, "Oh, she unplugged my stuff," to, "She tried to steal my life and forcibly move in with me." Let's see if we can get any crazier than that in the rest of the video. I had a best friend apparently steal my spare apartment key and make a copy of it. When I caught him at it, he tried lying, but I caught him at that too. Long story short, he was apparently in love with me and was coming into my apartment while I was at work because I miss her so much. He also admitted to stealing a pair of my undies. It was after an awful spinal surgery I went through when I was 12. They were cousins and my parents caught them trying to steal my painkillers. My wife's cousin was staying at our house because he was going through marital problems. One night I woke up in the middle of the night and I heard some change rattling. He walks down the hall with my 5-year-old's piggy bank. He was taking money from my daughter's frickin' piggy bank to go buy beer and smokes. And that's when you understood where the marital problems came from. This reminds me of when I was probably 6 and our housemate got her kid to steal the check I got for my birthday from my grandparents. It was probably like $40 or so, but a lot of money to me as a kid, and we didn't have a lot of money. So a lot of money to my mom too. My mom asked the lady about it and she completely denied it. Being 6, I went into their room and found it in her purse. My $40, thank you very much. Not house, but apartment in college. Roommate invited a bunch of people over one night. We each had our own bathroom, clearly marked. I go to get something from my room and I hear what can only be the sound of people doing the deed in my bathroom. I knock on the door and say, "Wrong one, get the F out." After they came out, I saw that they'd cleaned themselves up on my nice white towels, and apparently she was on her time of the month. This guy crapped his pants while sitting on my couch playing a video game and just sat there finishing the match. We were having an old-fashioned LAN party and the entire room cleared out. Well, it's not really a true LAN party until someone craps their pants, to be honest. We invited a group of people over for lunch. One of them arrived, put a bunch of food in a plastic container, and left to eat it with her boyfriend. I'm told she came back and grabbed 2 beers from the fridge, which is when everyone realized what was going on. I was a kid, my mum had a friend and her son over. They were over for a couple of hours, and just as they were leaving, I noticed all of my video games were gone. I told my mum, she went to grab his backpack, and of course they were all in his bag. His mother immediately came to his defense, saying he's got a lot of games and must have thought they were his. It didn't even make sense, and she was acting as if nothing had happened. Anyway, terrible mother, the kid had no chance. He's now in jail for life with no parole for shooting and killing a cop during a substance bust. Had a drunk partygoer attempt to do pull-ups from the planks of my old ranch-style ceiling just beneath the heat event and ended up pulling down a large portion of my frickin' ceiling. Refused to pay for it. One night, the girls who lived in the apartment across the hall brought a friend with them to hang with us. As soon as she walked in, she screamed, "This will be hilarious. College guys always get the crappy hand-me-down dishes from their parents." She walked into the kitchen, began pulling out pans and dishes and howling about how old and ratty they were. Our friends were mortified. When they tried to get her to be quiet, she talked louder. After 30 seconds of this lunacy, my roommate and I told her to leave. She threw a giant fit and called us the buttholes. Not my home, I guess, but I was renting a house and the landlady kept turning up unannounced and she'd let herself in. Then she'd give the key to people doing work on the house without telling us, so we'd, without warning, have strangers letting themselves into the house. It was a very stressful way to live. A babysitter stole my adult fun toy and blocked my calls. Like, really? I hosted a Sunday football game viewing. I bought all the pizzas and typical snacks and foods. I just wanted people to bring themselves and not worry about having to bring anything. One of my friends came by to say hello for about 5 minutes. She ended up taking 2 entire pizzas and she even bought her own Tupperware containers to take back dips, chips, wings, and cookies, so that she and her boyfriend could eat it at her own place while watching the exact same football game that we were watching at my place. My dog peed on the arm of the couch, the ottoman, and the fridge when I first got him, so that was pretty frickin' rude. Somebody left a small child in our house while they went to the grocery store. I rented a room to someone I knew since I was 12. He was using and selling H from my house. I found out and told him to get the frick out. He was too lazy to use the bathroom and went in bottles instead. I didn't know until I went in there after him. When I kicked him out, he'd thrown the pee all over the room before he'd left. Carved Third Reich symbols on my kid's bunk bed that I was letting him use. My grandmother took a family off the street who lived in their car. She lived alone and no one was happy about it, but my grandma does what grandma wants. She goes upstairs to clean their bathroom and finds their crystal lab. Calls my uncle to ask if she should call the police, because she doesn't want to put the family into more trouble. Yeah, she ended up calling the police. A now ex-girlfriend came into my parents' home for only the second time and said to my mother, "Wow, it's so tidy in here for a change, haha." I could see in my mother's eyes the thought process of how to slap her into the next century without making a scene. Thankfully, she laughed it off, but that was a big red flag for me. Yeah, I can imagine that sort of statement would actually induce heart attacks on those of us who heard it uttered to our mothers. Honestly, just reading this raised the narrator's blood pressure a tad. When I was in Cub Scouts, in 3rd grade nonetheless, my mum hosted a meeting for the scouts in my grade at school, where we built birdhouses for some badge or something. While we were waiting for everyone to arrive, me and the scouts who'd already arrived started playing in my backyard. One scout, let's call him Nate, told us he had to go to the bathroom real bad and left. When everyone arrived to start the project, I noticed that Nate was sitting at the edge of the table looking down and my mum was really angry and was trying her best to suppress it. She asked me and all the other scouts if I'd given Nate permission to go into my room. Me and all my friends said, no, he said he had to go to the bathroom really bad. This response only made my mum even more angry and Nate ducked his head more. 5 minutes later, Nate's mum arrives and is apologizing profusely to my mum. Turns out, Nate went into my room, pocketed the $20 I'd been saving up, I got paid $2 a week for mowing the lawn as an allowance, and was stuffing my toys and video games into his backpack. My mum went upstairs to actually use the bathroom and noticed the theft taking place and caught him red-handed. He then lied to my mum and said I gave him permission to go into my room and he was just checking it out. But nope, my mum caught him red-handed and my mum is scary when she's mad. In total, he tried to steal about $150 in Game Boy cartridges, Pokemon cards, and toys and about 3 months' worth of allowance. Back in college, my roommates and I hosted a birthday party for a mutual friend at our apartment. Earlier that day, we gifted her a pet goldfish because she'd been talking about getting a fish. Fast forward to later that night, our male friend, let's call him Mike, decided he needed to find a way to impress our other friend who I'll call Darla. Mike tries every lame joke and pickup line on Darla and fails time and time again. Then he sees the goldfish in his tank and scoops him up in his hand. He says, "Check this out, Darla," and then plops the fish into his mouth and swallows it live. My roommate and I immediately rush over and start trying to make Mike puke the fish back up. Darla quickly makes for the door and leaves the party. Sadly, that fish met its doom in Mike's stomach that night. He never apologized, though he did complain about severe stomach issues for several days afterwards. In short, bought a fish for a friend and another friend swallowed it live at a party to impress a girl. You can submit your own stories to be featured here on the channel. The story submission link is in the description below. And if you want to listen to some vibey music in the background, check out easymode, also linked below, and subscribe. When I was in like 2nd grade, I invited this girl over and we made popcorn as a snack, and not even 5 minutes later, this idiot decided it was a good idea to run all over the house, throwing it everywhere. This went on another 5 minutes while I chased her down. But the damage was done. The popcorn was in between couch cushions, under the fridge, under my bed, in my laundry basket, all over the damn floor. My mum ends up sitting us down and proceeds to lay it out on her, telling her what she did was disrespectful and to help clean up. She pouted and said no, saying since it wasn't her house, she didn't have to clean anything. She continued to pout as my mum called her mum and pretty much told her to leave and to not expect to be invited back anytime soon. I haven't spoken to her in a while, but apparently she got banned from the mall for trashing a Lush store with her friend, throwing food, dumping out products, and smashing bath bombs. So I guess she hasn't changed much. They intruded on my homemade family dinner uninvited and then insulted my cooking. Didn't even get a thank you either. Don't get me wrong, a lot of these comments describe vandalism and theft and a drunken or substance-fueled jerkery, but I can never stand anyone eating another's home-cooked food and being disrespectful. It's just not okay. One of my little brother's friends would always ask for something else to be made. Even if it was a steak just for him, he'd want leftover pizza or some French fries. Despite him being a relatively normal kid, we all hated him for spurning our food. An old roommate peed in my cat's litter pan because apparently I deserved to clean up his pee. He was mad I wouldn't pay his rent for the 3rd month in a row. Absolute jerk. Told me that my food was crap and refused to eat anything. When my husband was in the army, we invited a bunch of single soldiers to have Thanksgiving dinner at our house rather than let them languish in the barracks. One of them was a childish private. He began the night by plopping down on the sofa to play on his Game Boy and announced that he hated turkey. Ignored everyone else for the next hour. Okay, no problem. I made a massive dinner and there were plenty of other things to eat. When it came time to serve up the buffet, people lined up and were heaping their plates, and this idiot kept loudly complaining that there was nothing good. Selected a few items and joined everyone at the table. Took one bite of one thing, visibly gagged and threw down his fork. Announced that all the food was crap and left the table. Went back to the sofa with his Game Boy. I think that everyone was in such shock that nobody knew how to react. This was so far outside the norm that there was no way to prepare for it. No one wanted to ruin the evening by making a scene, so everyone focused on making me feel better. Lots of quick hugs and pats on the shoulder with words of encouragement. Maybe they were waiting for my husband to do something and he was loading up at the buffet and talking at the time, so he missed it. Deep breaths, move on. We're not going to allow one idiot to ruin our night. Everyone blew it off and ignored him for a while. We enjoyed our meal and people went out of their way to tell me how lovely the food was and to thank me for inviting them. People began to break up and get drinks. Music was turned up and we settled in for a nice evening. About an hour after dinner, the stinker began to whine that he was hungry, that there wasn't anything to eat, and would not shut up. Demanded that someone order pizza, and at one point he asked for a peanut butter sandwich. I made him one and he complained because it was whole wheat bread and he only liked white. After he rejected the sandwich, I didn't know what the hell to do. I stood there holding the damn thing and I was pretty close to just throwing it at him. Enough people saw my predicament, finally had enough, and stepped in to help me. 3 soldiers abruptly excused themselves, pulled him off the couch, and marched him outside. The soldiers came in about 15 minutes later, picked up their drinks, and continued the conversation like nothing had ever happened. I never saw him again, and I mean never. He must have been banned from every social function from then on out, because it's like he never existed. The sad thing is that a lot of immature kids are encouraged to join by exasperated families in an effort to make a man out of them, and it rarely works. Thankfully, they never last. Locked me out of my own bedroom and proceeded to destroy my stuff, then had the nerve to yell at me for saying she can't go back in my room. Kicked my cat, smoked my devil's lettuce without permission, peed on the toilet seat, and then stole some games when they left. all in one 40-minute visit. Awful, but it's kind of impressive just how much crappy behavior they fit into such a short amount of time. Any one of those could conceivably get you blacklisted from someone's place. It's just sort of jaw-dropping that they did them all in under an hour. I had a massive party for my 18th, close to 100 people, so I knew something would go wrong. Turns out the worst thing that went wrong was that someone was able to somehow go number 2 in our oven. Luckily, I didn't have to clean it out. We found the culprit and got him to do it. Kicked my dog. She was an all-round crappy person, so it felt like karma when her chest implants got infected. Buddy from college was traveling through town and stayed with my wife and I for the weekend. Nothing crazy, we hung out and remembered our college years. A few days after he left, my guest bathroom reeked. Took a bit to figure out, but finally discovered an upper decker left for us. Disgusting. Started opening all of the drawers in my room. Someone frickin' broke my Super Smash Bros. For the GameCube. My sister's old boyfriend from high school watched illegal adult films featuring animals on our family computer and ended up making it unusable because of the amount of viruses it gave the computer. Lots of pictures and videos went missing, and my dad's childhood friend's obituary as well. My dad did end up getting his friend's obituary back, but the rest of our pictures and videos were lost. This all happened about 10 years ago, and back then my parents, who aren't the most tech-savvy, didn't realize you could back up files. My siblings and I showed them how to make backups after that incident. Years ago, my then boyfriend, now ex, came over to my house unexpected the day of my mum's birthday. My siblings and I were busy redecorating. He made himself comfortable on the couch and played on the Xbox. He was out of the way, so we ignored him. Just before she gets home, I make him turn off the console. Mum gets home and we do the whole surprise bit, and my ex immediately, like my mum hadn't even got past the entryway, grabbed the controller, turned the Xbox on, slapped my butt and told me to get him a drink, as he sat back down on the couch. I snatched the controller out of his hands and told him to go home. They changed my bathroom mirror because apparently they didn't like the one I had. It was my mother-in-law who came to visit my then boyfriend and I. We were in a rental that had a weird little bathroom that the rest of the house made up for. But I got up in the morning and went to the gym and grabbed some food to make dinner. When I got home, I went to shower and she had taken down the bathroom mirror which came with the rental and put up a new one that was really ugly and too small. I wrapped myself in a towel and switched it back. She asked me why I did that and I told her it wasn't my mirror and gave her the other one back. They tried to discipline my very old, very sick dog for jumping up on the couch after they'd given the jump up on the couch signal to him. I'd trained him to come by patting 3 times on whatever surface he was invited to, and this person kept doing the pat 3 times and then yelling at the poor confused puppy for coming. They were trying to summon the cat, and that went about as well as expected when you try to tell a cat what to do. I had a roommate bring people back to have a house party. Me and the other housemate were just chilling in the living room. A guy immediately steals a beer I've got in the fridge and does a line of white snow on the mantelpiece. No, I was not offered a line. Some girl comes over to try and do the deed with my roommate, who had a girlfriend that she was aware of, by the way, and she ends up spewing all over the living room. I tell my roommate to clean it up, it's his problem. Half an hour later, I'm back in the living room and I see the mess there still. Feeling better? I ask nicely. And this witch, who had just entered my house for the first time and blown chunks everywhere, gives me a look like I just called her mum the C-word. Eyebrows furrowed, nostrils flaring, evil sneer, doesn't say a word, just glares at me. I started to tell her how disrespectful it was, but my roommate diffused the situation before I could say anything. The witch never said a word to me, just glared. Ooh, just thinking about that glare infuriates me. My sister constantly invites herself over almost every single day to eat or use our shower or Wi-Fi, and brings her kids and expects someone else to watch over them while she does this. She has her own food. I just find it very rude because we have plans that get cancelled because she doesn't want to watch her kids. We have to make extra food so they can eat. It's a big deal, we live off food stamps and social security stuff. It honestly just sickens me how she can be so selfish and then cry when anyone calls her on her BS. I own my home and my boyfriend lives with me. He invited 2 of his friends over to play board games one day. The one friend decided to come for my throat in the board game, and when I outplayed him and blocked him from winning, he decided to get me back by being obnoxious. I asked him repeatedly to tone it back. He started talking nasty about women and how worthless they are. Mind you, I was the only one of us 4 who owned a home. And he was showing sexist YouTube videos to the other friend along with making crazy loud noises and generally saying dumb things. This went on for 8 hours. After he left, he texted my boyfriend trying to say they couldn't hang out anymore because he couldn't respect someone who was with me and he'd never be able to handle being in the same room as me, and if they were going to be friends and hang out, I couldn't be there. Kicked in my front door at 8 a.m. on a Saturday and asked if I liked effing her husband. I wasn't fully awake and was completely confused, so all that came up was, yeah, it's fine. They'd been divorced for about 2 years by then. Then about 1 to 2 years after that, an old friend of my husband's stopped by. The dude was drunk as heck and kept loudly telling my husband to get his family back, referring to my husband's ex. We were married, had custody of his daughter, and I was 8 months pregnant with our next daughter at the time. His family was in the frickin' room, dude.
Generally calm people of Reddit, what made you lose your absolute mind that time? It always felt like my parents never wanted me. I was a surprise honeymoon baby born 9 months and a day after their wedding. I was regularly screamed at for anything I did until I just started hiding. I was called, quote, the practice child my whole life. My younger siblings got way more love and attention, etc. In my teens, they started taking in, quote, strays. If any neighborhood kids didn't want to go home, they could just be at our house all the time. Effectively, my mother would take my friends away from me to be her friends instead. One of which was a kid who picked on me constantly from the time I was 11. I guess they had that in common. That guy was kicked out of his dad's house and his mom's house when he was 20, so my parents took him in permanently. That killed me. But I always wanted their approval, so I was always calm and agreeable, always desperately trying to figure out how to get them to love me, so I went along with it. Years later, I married and have a son. This guy still lives with my parents. They continue to coddle and make excuses for him while criticizing me for whatever they feel like. One day, we're all at my parents' house and my son is being a goofy 2-year-old, which annoys the man-child living there. So he gets furious, picks my son up by his ankle, and spanks him. My parents claim not to have seen it. We went home. I couldn't sleep that night because I was so upset. The next morning, I made sure the guy and my mom would be at home, and why wouldn't he be there? And I went to confront them with my wife. I dumped everything I had been putting up with on them for about an hour, including asking how my mom could allow this jerk to hit my son. She maintained that it didn't happen, so I went through the roof. I ended up crying because of all the pent-up emotion, so my fantastic wife took over. She said we wouldn't be coming back if the guy still lived there, so he yelled that he would move out and he stormed off after saying he didn't have to listen to this. My parents convinced him not to move out shortly after we left. My mother expressed how disappointed she was that I didn't come, quote, to have a conversation and only came to, quote, dump on them. That was her big takeaway from everything I said, that I wasn't being fair to them. We went to counseling with them later. For months. It validated everything I had felt, but they never stopped lying and being defensive. One counselor said we should be on Dr. Phil. The other counselor said my mom is, quote, incapable of empathy. Both counselors called my parents delusional, but of course, my parents didn't take any of that seriously. At one point, my dad asked me, who does he think he is to judge us like that? As if he forgot that's their job. Haven't spoken with them in almost a year, and life is so much better. My brother and I played travel sports for a few seasons as kids. One trip, I was at the pool with some of his teammates messing around in the water, and the coach's kid was being a jerk as usual. My brother was one of the smaller kids on his team, so the coach's son would screw with him a lot. Most of the kids on my brother's team disliked him, but didn't speak up so they wouldn't be next. He thought it would be funny to pick up my brother's drink right in front of him and spit into it. My dad taught me from a young age not to let anyone screw with my brother or sister, so I got seriously angry. I took a good running start and shoulder-checked him into the pool. Since he had just gotten there, he hadn't taken his clothes off yet and cried because his phone and iPod got ruined. He literally ran out yelling, "I'm telling my dad!" Well, that backfired because everyone stuck up for my brother, and the coach was not happy to find out what a crap bird his son was being, so he was the only one to get in any trouble. Sometimes justice is a dish best served cold, and other times it's served extremely wet. Ruined iPod and all. My grandfather passed away, so I told my boss that I had to take a couple of days off to be with my family. He had the nerve to tell me work was more important than family and threatened to fire me. I went off on him in the middle of the office for a solid 5 minutes before quitting and rushing home. This lady came to the shelter to see the cats. She asks if she could give them treats, and I said yes. It's a shelter where most of the cats are free. So she gets the bag out, the cats are going wild with anticipation, and she just stood there, laughing and tempting them without giving them anything. She looked like she enjoyed their anxiety, and her laugh sounded like a crazy person. I lost it, grabbed the bag out of her hands, gave treats to the cats, and asked her to leave. Those cats are already stressed out. Don't give them more anxiety. I can remember that day like it was yesterday. I was home packing my stuff to get ready for when my husband was out of basic training. I never yell or even raise my voice to hardly anyone ever. My dad has always had a wicked temper, and my sister also had a knack for starting yelling matches with him. One night, she forgot to do something she was supposed to, and the yelling started again. I ignored it up until he called her stupid. It got under my skin, so I spoke up a little, saying that he shouldn't call her that. He hollered back, "You are my daughters. I can talk to you however I want." That's when I snapped. I saw red for the first time in my life, and I completely lost it. I screamed back at him at how I was tired of him treating us like garbage when he lost his temper, at how we hid in the back room with my mom until he cooled off, and how all I wanted was to visit my family before I had to move over 12 hours away from them. I also threatened that if he ever wanted to see me again, then he needed to shut up and sit in the corner until he was done throwing a fit. I yelled at him for the first time in my life for a solid 30 minutes. I didn't stop until everything I had to say built over the years was out, and I saw him go from red-faced angry to what seemed to be guilt-ridden. When I finally stopped, he was quiet. He didn't say a word and walked away. Shortly after I moved out, he went to a doctor and has been put on some medication to help with his anger issues. Now, he's super friendly, and I haven't heard him throw a tantrum like he used to in over 10 years now. He has never spoken poorly to me or my sister since then either. I lost my mind when my patient got her pre-authorization for surgery for a large grapefruit-sized pelvic mass denied by BCBS, and when I did a peer-to-peer, the doctor working for the insurance company said I needed to have a psychiatrist rule out mental causes of her pain first. I had to walk away for 30 minutes before seeing another patient because, had anyone given me any more lip, I might have gotten violent. I lost my mind when I was late for work because my colleague asked me to cover their shift and gave me the wrong time, and it was my fault from the company's perspective. This happened in some club ages ago. I was bouncing around on the dance floor with everybody else and apparently stepped on some dude's foot who had been standing there with this posse of 2 or 3 other guys watching people. I shrugged and apologized, then turned around to leave. Right then, quote, somebody smacked me in the back of the head. Not hard, but too hard to ignore. I turned around still calm and said something like, "Look, I'm gonna walk this way, you guys stay here and nothing more needs to happen." Turned around again, got smacked in the head again. I was very much ticked off at that point. It didn't help that they looked at me all innocent. I couldn't even tell which one of them did it. So I just stuck my finger in the face of the dude whose foot I allegedly stepped on and recommended he don't do that again. Turned around once more, waiting to get smacked in the head again. This time, they poured a glass of beer in my back. That's when I completely lost my mind. Threw myself around and went straight at the guy. I was in full rage mode, didn't care what happened next as long as that guy suffered. I could tell by the terrified look on his face he realized he had gone too far. His friends never stepped in to help him. After a while, people separated us, and that was that. I have no sympathy at all for people who resort to violence for solving their problems, but feel no shame for having snapped in that situation. I think I did everything in my power to avoid what eventually happened. So, earlier this year, my health insurance got messed up. I started making too much money to qualify for my state's Medicare, so healthcare.gov requested a notification from NJ Family Care to confirm I wasn't on it anymore. So in January, I called them to get said notification. They say, "Yeah, you should get it in a couple of weeks." It never comes. Unfortunately, I had forgotten about it until healthcare.gov sends me a message that they're going to raise my insurance costs if I don't get them the message in the next 2 weeks. So I call NJ Family Care again and explain to them the situation. They once again claim they're going to send me the notice and don't. So now, after getting an extension from healthcare.gov about this, I call up NJ Family Care once more and attempt to explain the situation, politely requesting the cancellation notice. But the woman on the phone gets an attitude with me, saying some stupid stuff like, you know this is the cancellation department, right? And I lost my mind. What is your problem? I don't understand why you can't just send me this stupid letter. What's happening over there? Just look in the file and cancel it. Yes, you dog. I know this is the cancellation department. I want a notice that it's canceled. I must have scared the crap out of her because the next thing she said was, I'll go get my supervisor, who solved the problem in 10 minutes, and I got my cancellation notice 3 days later. My friend is bad with math. I was explaining a thing once. It took 10 minutes. He tells me he doesn't get it. So I sit there and explain this thing more deeply. Took 30 minutes. He's like, takes in-ear headphones out of ear. He was covering it with his hand. Oh, sorry, I wasn't listening to you. Found this amazing radio recently. I lost my mind. I worked at a diner with an open kitchen. You can see us, and we can see you. I'm the only cook during the lunch rush when I hear a lady shout, "Hey!" I look over and a lady sitting in a booth points at me and then does a very condescending come here motion with her finger. I thought something was wrong with her food, so I decide I could run out of the kitchen, leaving 4 orders on the grill, and see what I need to fix. She has no food on her table. She holds her blue soda cup out to me and asks, "What is this?" Excuse me? Why is my root beer in a soda cup and not a mug? I don't know, I'm just the cook. Oh great, another freaking idiot in this freaking place who doesn't know anything. She then proceeds to chew me out because I, the cook, do not know why the server gave her root beer in a cup. We have special root beer mugs, but the servers couldn't find them. Someone misplaced them. I apologize and head back into the kitchen while she's loudly talking crap about me to the next booth to find out that all of my orders are ruined and more have been coming in. It's already stressful working in a kitchen, and that was the last straw. I went in back, started screaming and kicking the crap out of the walk-in cooler. When I went back out, everyone was quiet and avoided eye contact, even the lady with the issues. Still looked pretty mad though. I rushed through the orders and thank God she left without saying anything. I didn't get in trouble though, since my manager was serving and had to deal with her as well. He understood. My friend, who is usually a chill person, had some girl make fun of her brother who was killed, and she ended up beating the crap out of her, smashing her face into the wall and getting kicked out of our school for it. Deserved. I was in charge of a rollover trainer once at a military training site. Think of a Humvee on an axle that spins, like a rollover accident. Part of the safety brief before anyone goes in is to empty their pockets of all items. Take any items on belts off. We have rubber items inside to simulate stuff flying. We do this for safety's sake. Part of the training is we stop the trainer on its side/roof so the participants can get exposure to assisting the other passengers and exit the vehicle safely and quickly. It's been a long, boring as crap day, and like all good army training, I am hungover and irritated. All officers, and they are listening for crap. We stop the exercise on the roof for a group, and they all exit except one who can't undo the seatbelt. I open the door and reach in and placed my hand on a dual-edge 4-inch boot knife. I absolutely lost my mind. I saw red, my ears burned, and I distinctly remember seeing one of the other instructors mouth, "Oh crap." I chewed out every freaking officer there, all of whom outranked me, many of whom outranked my commander. Didn't matter, as my position was safety officer. I went on a tirade. I turn around after it was done, and my best friend is freaking recording it on his phone. That jerk showed that clip the rest of the week and for years after him. I miss that sucker every day. Update, sadly, that video is long gone, I imagine. Yes, I am former military, gladly retired. My son was maybe 8 months old and had recently been diagnosed as profoundly deaf. Deaf kids will often inhale to make vibrations and noise that they can somewhat, quote, hear for stimulation. We were on pins and needles as I had just lost my job, and our insurance and the cochlear implant surgery was going to cost us $170,000. We'd have to sell the house and one of the cars. We needed a break, and our in-laws took us to the food court at a local mall. Our boy started to inhale and gasp. "He needs a beating," a fat 20-something said, not so quietly to our friends at the table next to us. I rarely curse in public and am generally non-confrontational, but a stream of insulting profanity issued from my mouth for a good 10 minutes that would have put a sailor to shame. I found it couldn't stop, and it got on the verge of Bukowskian poetry. I insulted her, her mother, her weight, and her pinched-face friends. I launched into the smell of her genitalia, how fat she was, how she'd only be able to reproduce with a blind, drunk moron with a death wish, as she was uglier than the devil's butthole on fire with a crap of heck. And it only progressed from there. F. Lee Ermey's Marine Drill Sergeant from Full Metal Jacket would have told me to tone it down a bit. I told her he was deaf and that we couldn't stop it, and this was a goddamn food court in a crappy southern town filled with crappy inbred, hell-spawn, redneck, ignorant mutant troglodytes that embarrassed normal troglodytes. The food court was silent, and all the eyes were upon us. And then it progressed from there. She got up and left crying. I can honestly say the whole rant was involuntary, like a pus-filled boil popping and draining in a torrent. I had never done anything like this before and have not done it since. I feel bad for her to this day. My 7th freaking trip to the DMV when trying to reinstate my license. Every single time, they scrutinized my paperwork and always managed to find something wrong and would send me away to fix it. On this 7th trip, they finally resorted to, "You have no proof that you ever had a license," despite my piles of paperwork showing my driving record, among other things. I refused to leave the seat and said, "You people are monsters." A manager was called. We argued. He said he believed that I had had a license, but there was just no proof, and he couldn't risk accepting my paperwork in case someone checked it. I said I refused to leave the seat until I knew exactly what was needed. Manager said, "Tell you what, I can contact last state I lived in and can get a verification that I had had a license there. It would take 3 minutes." That's when I yelled in the DMV, "Why wasn't that the first thing you said?" Anyway, I got my license back. I grew up on a farm, and one day, several cows decided that since their head could fit through a small hole in a gate, then their whole body could fit through a small hole in a gate. This resulted in a broken gate, a cow stuck in the broken gate, several cows roaming freely in a field after escaping through the broken gate, and me absolutely losing my mind. I now work in IT. Cows are dumb. Username Recovering Farmer checks out. In 6th grade, a group of some 4 kids took monopoly of the back of the bus, a true power move. I always minded my own business and tried to sit away from them. For one, they all didn't understand basic hygiene and smelled even though they were older than me. Anyway, turns out the bus driver was their quiet retired grandpa who would never tell them to stop bullying or doing dumb crap. So one time, they have a freaking spitting war. As in, they spit across the seats at each other as they jump seats for cover. At one point, I was the seat in the middle, and a giant wad of their disgusting spit hit me square in my face. I then proceeded to take my Pearson history book, one of those big, heavy, hardcover textbooks, and smash them over the head with it. Granted, this was me telling them to stop their nonsense several times. The spitting stopped after that. Anyway, the book cover cracked and I had to pay for it at the end of the year, but I regret nothing. This guy at work was, quote, cleaning out the work break room. Basically, he was throwing out people's personal belongings. So, I see my new coffee mug I bought specifically for work in the trash and lost my mind. I started yelling at him that what he was doing was morally wrong and it's not his stuff to throw out. I went to my HR manager and complained to him about the principle of the thing. I took all the coffee mugs in the trash out and washed them. The good thing is, if you are a calm person 99% of the time, people are more likely to listen to you in the 1% of moments you lose it. Exactly. I used to waitress and never caused any drama. I was there to make money for my wedding. I showed up on time, didn't take smoke breaks, never on my phone, and rolled with the punches. The 2 best compliments of my life came from my manager. One was him thanking me for not making him know my fiance's name. I never had problems to deal with at work like the other girls, and I didn't chit-chat. And when all heck was breaking loose, he called me his calm little Hindu calf, which still makes me laugh. Anyway, this jerk of a cook wouldn't stop calling me pet names and trying to touch me. Every time I said loudly and clearly, "Don't touch me," and "My name isn't Sweetheart, it's Hopeful Kitty." Everyone knew how I felt, and they tried to tell me, "That's just how he is, let it go." I told them that the way I am is that I don't want him to touch me. When the manager talked to him, he'd stop for a few weeks, then start again. After months of this, I told the manager if it didn't stop, I was going to file a harassment complaint. Manager talked to the owner and asked if he'd rather have the cook or me because I was on the verge of quitting, and they agreed they'd rather have me 100 times over this dude. He was gone by the next day, and I got an escort to my car every night. Turns out, if you are drama-free and calm, people really listen when you have a problem. I lost it on a nurse in a nursing home once in my fire/EMS days. We ran a call there at 8 a.m., and she said she had just got there and didn't know anything about the patient or their condition. Alright, plausible enough. Run there again at 11 a.m., same nurse, same story. Okay, fine, maybe you haven't had enough time to actually catch up on your patients. We're annoyed at this point, but keeping our crap to ourselves. 1:30 p.m. rolls around, and we get another call to the same place. Same nurse. Exact same response as the first 2 times. I lost my cool and started yelling at her in the hallway outside the patient's room. I was livid. How have you been here for at minimum 5.5 hours and still don't have any info on any other patient? It was absolutely unacceptable, and I let her know that in no uncertain terms. She called my chief and I got yelled at for verbally harassing a nurse. 3 months later, we get a call to the same place for an 85-year-old woman with an altered mental status. We get there, it's the same nurse. Yet again, same bullcrap answer that she didn't know the status, but stated that a tech had checked in on the woman 15 minutes ago. We go in the room and this woman is dead. Like, dead. Full rigor, emptied bowels, the works. We tell her this and she panics and runs in and starts CPR. We're like, no, she dead. Obvious signs of death and there is no working this patient. She was fired the next day. Bug exterminators of Reddit. What was your "we're gonna need a bigger boat" moment? Spent the summer between high school and college working for a local, family-run exterminating company. Nice gig. Residential treatments during the day, mosquito fogging at night, and the occasional dairy farm treated for flies and rats. One day, I'm at one of these dairy farms and enter the milking parlor to spray and set up traps. See a rather large cat across the parlor from the front door. Good for him, I think, growing fat, eating rodents, and whatever else he's caught over the years. I enter the parlor and the cat moves, and I realize the cat is not a cat, but a rat. Easily the size of a 12 to 15 pound feline and running down a drainage pipe. Decided that I did not want to be a sacrifice to the Rat King that day and noped out of there fast. Rats, where the rats? I'm not an exterminator, but that didn't stop my aunt from asking me and my brother from taking care of a hornet's nest. I figured that I could handle it. Heard somewhere that WD-40 supposedly kills hornets, so one night we go over with a can of spray foam and a half dozen cans of WD-40. It was quiet, so I quickly spray the entrance shut with the foam and we go to town on it with the WD. That's when we heard an unholy and frankly terrifying sound come from the nest. We should have ran, but we kept spraying. However, the hornets were not going without a fight. They somehow tore open another entrance and poured out. That's when we started running. Luckily, I parked my car close by and had the doors open, but I had a couple dozen stings, as did my brother. 2 out of 10 would not try it again. That said, the hornets did abandon the nest, and a couple of days later when the swelling went down, we went back, cut the branch down, and lit the nest on fire. It went up in a puff of flame and smoke, so that was fun. But never again am I going up against hornets without calling an exterminator first. I developed a phobia of wasps in the last couple of weeks. I deal with industrial batteries for forklifts, order pickers, stuff like that. We had a 3-day job down in Eugene where we basically had to just pressure wash a crapload of batteries. The customer had to set up outside underneath this metal overhang, during the hottest week in Oregon history, mind you, so that sucked as well. There were nests all along the underside of the overhang, and their occupants were less than thrilled with our presence there. On the 3rd day, we were finally wrapping up, and there were a few older batteries that we needed to prep for shipping because the customer was getting rid of them. One of them was on a busted pallet, so we needed to move it to another one. To do this, you take a strap with 2 hooks on it and hook it to either side of the battery. Well, I go to hook it up, and when I put the hook into the lifting eye of the battery, a crapload of wasps flew out of it and attacked me. I say this with no pride whatsoever. There is no manly way to run away from a swarm of angry wasps. I frolicked out of there as fast as my butt could frolic. Then, I grabbed a broom and used it to open up the lid of this battery, at which point I find the wasps have built a gigantic nest inside the battery. The lid is maybe 3 feet long, probably 10 inches across. These suckers built up all along the bottom of it. They were hanging out inside the battery cells where all the acid and lead and fun stuff is. So yeah, we didn't ship that one. Not dealing with mutant acid-soaked wasps. Pulled back insulation in a crawl space to track termite damage. About 100 plus baby/juvenile cottonmouths came out from where the dryer vent wasn't hooked up properly, keeping them nice and warm and moist in the insulation as fall approached. I'm only a termite exterminator. Got out that crawl space quicker than lightning. To this day, I'm sure the termites and snakes are living under there happily ever after. Got called out to a house that had a roach problem. So, I walk in the house, and I crap you not, you could barely see the color of the walls and ceiling for all the roaches. It was literally raining roaches from the ceiling. The people inside just sitting around, like it's a normal Monday, and laughing about catching roaches falling from the ceiling. Without a doubt, the most disgusting thing I've encountered. Edit. Forgot to mention, I opened the cabinets, and I'll never forget seeing the hundreds of thousands going across their pots and pans. It's raining roach! Hallelujah, it's raining roaches! I worked at a gas station on overnights and asked my manager to do something about the spider infestation. I hate spiders, and it was so bad customers started going to other places because these big spiders would build webs over the door in the span of 40 minutes between customers, plus the entire awning and overhang was just a mess of webs and hanging spider nests. So, she goes out and buys some spray, and it barely does anything. So she goes and buys a bunch of spray and is standing outside one day just spraying the awnings and overhang, the doors, air pump, etc. Anyways, there was this large crack in the siding, so she stuck the spray nozzle inside and started spraying. I'd have died. What followed was so bad, I probably would have died from terror. The way she described it, after the screaming stopped and the color came back, was as if someone turned a great big faucet on. Hundreds of spiders just came pouring out like water. Must have been a ton of nests inside there. Not an exterminator. Get used to hearing that, by the way. Screw it, since we're all just sharing our worst anyway. My apartment's got an indoor trash chute under the kitchen sink. It has a habit of falling open by itself, and pests crawl up and into our house from it. Roaches, the works. We've been fighting them for weeks. Eventually, 17-year-old me comes up with the brilliant plan of doing a seal. I use trash bags and some strong tape to make an airtight seal around the offending chute. I do 3 layers of magic. The barrier works. The roaches couldn't cross into our realm from theirs. 3 years later, we start finding small dead roaches in the kitchen, maybe one in the toilet. I've forgotten all about the dark forces I banished years ago, and I'm mystified. The bodies start getting bigger as the weeks pass. Eventually, we start finding live specimens, and they're pretty large. I finally twig that perhaps the ancient seal has been breached. I get on down to the compartment under the sink and open it up. Horror. The roaches had slowly bitten through the seals and ended up breeding within the layers of the seal. Eventually, they got through the final seal, and as the breach grew wider, larger and more vicious bugs got through. I could see them roiling and seething in a bunch within the plastic. I realized what a huge mistake I made all those years ago, and now the evil was back for me. I ended up bringing in some industrial-strength pesticide and fighting through the outer guard to get to the breach. I couldn't let any survivors past me or would get into the house. I pushed a tube into the breach and made a temporary seal around it with more tape and let loose with the pesticide. I could hear the roaches scrambling in the plastic, getting more hectic as they started to die. Fighting continued as I was still rounding up survivors who escaped and putting them down while the pesticide did its work. Once I heard nothing from the seal, I tore it down. It was carnage, beyond disgusting. That motivated us to tear that crap out and get a new roach-proof chute installed. And I got an idea for a fantasy setting for my creative work. We have a problem with Japanese beetles. Like, a big one. I bought a trap after seeing 10 or 20 hanging out on my roses. But then, the trap was completely full within an hour. We're talking thousands of beetles caught in just an hour. So I go to investigate. Surely they didn't all come from my roses, right? So I start checking my trees, a few here and there until I get to this crepe myrtle at the very edge of the yard. It was literally covered in beetles. As in, the beetles were screwing. Hundreds of thousands of beetles. My dad decided the best thing to do was to shake the tree and scare them off. That was the worst idea. Beetles rained from the heavens. The sky was dark and swirling with beetles. They covered me, even though I had retreated to a safe distance, sticking in my hair, crawling in my clothes. Dad stopped, dropped, and rolled. As these beetles were stirred into action, so were all of the beetles from all of the trees beyond. It was Armageddon. I was not convinced I would survive this. A few days later, Dad, dressed in a makeshift hazmat suit, went out and doused every tree with the most toxic bug killer he could find. Even now, weeks later, we have to pick the stiff corpses of beetles out of our dog's fur whenever he comes inside. I still have nightmares. Screw Japanese beetles. I'm not an exterminator, but I do bee removals for a living. The most honey I pulled out of a house was about 250 pounds. That's about 21 gallons of honey. I had to leave halfway through to go to Home Depot because I only had 3 to 5 gallon buckets with me. People sometimes try and kill hives with Raid. While it may be effective in some cases, no one is going to call me when it works. In other cases, it backfires spectacularly. For most of her life, the queen is fat to lay eggs. She can fly, but only short distances. So sometimes, when you spray a hive, you'll annoy the bees enough for them to abandon the hive and try to start a new one, but the queen is too fat, so they'll only move to another spot in the same house. The workers at the old hive will raise a new queen, and now you have 2 hives. I removed 7 different hives at the same house because the guy never caught on to what he was doing and kept spraying the bees. Not an exterminator, but this happened to a friend of mine in college. He was in a frat and actually lived in the frat house. During one of the parties they threw, a water pipe was broken. They didn't stop the party or really even act like it happened, so there was just water all over the place. Eventually, they just shut off the water, but didn't call any kind of plumber/cleaner for the water that was probably an inch deep on the floor. Instead, they set up little stepping stones to make it out of the front door without getting in water. However, because there was so much stagnant water just sitting around, mosquitoes were breeding like crazy. I crap you not, you couldn't be in the house for more than 5 minutes without getting 50 mosquito bites. The worst place I've ever been. They were eventually kicked out of the house when the frat advisor saw what happened, called the landlord, and the landlord had seen what happened. My husband and his first wife had a spider infestation in their backyard one summer. It started with spiders in their cedar hedges, a few. They knew they were in trouble when the entire hedge turned white from the webs. My husband goes to the hardware store and gets some malathion, dons a hazmat suit, and goes outside to start spraying. As he sprays, the cedars start to shake. The entire 6-foot-high hedge is shaking, spiders start dropping on him, and he drops the malathion and runs. A week later, all the grass is now white too. He calls 2 different exterminators who say F this, but also tell him to call the Ministry of Natural Resources. Resource officer comes out, looks, explains what the spiders are. I don't recall the species, but they were big. And apparently, the eggs can lay in gestation for decades, waiting for exactly the right environment. Apparently, they like to lay nests in wood. Being the Ministry of Natural Resources, they don't offer to kill the spiders, naturally. He is out of options and has to wait until the frost kills all of these suckers. In Canada, frost comes usually October-ish, so frost comes, never has he been so thrilled to greet a Canadian winter. Next spring, he calls his buddy, kind of a roughneck, to help him dismantle the wood shed in the back of the yard, which is assumed to be the nesting grounds. As my husband and his then-wife cower inside, they watch out the kitchen door as Buddy tears down to the shed to burn at his farm. The shed's rafters are covered in what looks like pillows, clouds, foam. All the rafters are positively bathed in spider eggs. Buddy dismantles the shed, puts it in his trailer, and takes all of the wood and the nest to the farm for cremation. Buddy also has a terrific time going up to the window and taunting them with the rafters. As an epilogue, just when they think this nightmare is over, one spring day they have a nice bath, and as they get out of the tub, there is a large spider, the same species, on the outside of the tub. He crushes it with a CD case. It's so large, it made a crunch. That must have been the last one, as they never returned. Freaking horror show. TLDR, entire backyard is bathed in spiders, no help available, have to wait for winter to kill them off. Turns out the old wooden shed was the breeding ground. Beekeeper, but most of us are somehow in the wasp removal business too. Mentor thought he saw a small hornet's nest and took about the precautions of making a dainty wasp trap out of vinegar in an old Sprite bottle. Upon realizing the hellacious magnitude of these little suckers, he filled an outdoor vac with dishwater, set the hose under his gutter, and set the thing to suck. He's already emptied out 3 gallons of hornets. Bye, buttholes. Not a bug exterminator, but the first apartment I ever got after college I now refer to as Crap Hole. There were lots of off things about Crap Hole, like how people like to break my apartment's windows, or how, upon move-in, the dishwasher turned out to be just for show and inoperable. Crap Hole was street level. The basement level, which I discovered via a crawlspace door hanging open into the alleyway that led to the washer/dryer area, was filled with abandoned construction supplies, to the brim. As in, old paint and wood and screws toppling out of the crawlspace. I knew it was a cesspool. I knew pests probably lived there. I figured raccoons, and decided to get on the lookout for a new apartment. The day of move out, the day I need to pack all my stuff, I'm showering in the 2x2 foot shower stall, and something touches my feet. It's red with long crooked antenna, but it's small. Just as I kick it off, 3 more appear. Baby German cockroaches have hatched in the drain of my shower stall. They're crawling up through the drain and onto my feet, up my legs, up the walls. Within seconds, they're everywhere. I ran out of the bathroom, still wet and soapy, and slammed the door. Nope. This is Crap Hole, and no door fits its frame. The cockroaches come bursting out through the crack underneath it. I rush to the bedroom, shampoo in my hair, my body wetting the whole floor behind me, and shake my boyfriend awake. Before I can even tell him what's happening, there's a meow, meow down the hall. My cat had been in the bathroom while I showered. Crap. I run back, will myself to open the bathroom door, where roaches are still scampering under the cracks and desperate mew mew sounds are emanating. I open it. The roaches are climbing the mirror, they're in the shower curtain. I find my cat, a baby roach on his side, one in his whiskers, and flick them off, grabbing him and carrying him outside. So there we sat, outside our apartment, the 3 of us trying to figure out what to do at this point. All we want is to get out of Crap Hole, and now every item we own is infested. Now, no matter what we do, Crap Hole will follow us, and it'll screw not just us, but our new neighbors, our new neighborhood too. We Googled it. We put everything we owned in an XXL black double-thick garbage bag meant for yard work from Home Depot. We filled each bag with pesticide. We moved the bags to our new apartment and let them sit out on the patio for 2 days. We slept on wood floors. We bought all new groceries. We bought 2 new towels. 2 days pass. We open the bags and nothing moves. We wash all the clothes/linens. I haven't seen a cockroach since. But F that apartment. F you, Crap Hole. May you burn to the ground. Obligatory, I'm not an exterminator, but my dad and stepmom held their wedding at our house. They wanted something small, close family and close friends only. Basically, like an average get-together with cake and a ceremony. They got Italian food catered, and it was overall an amazing time. Fast forward to maybe 2 or 3 days after, I was cleaning up the last of the mess from the party, and I go to take the garbage out. There are a handful of flies around the garbage, but I think nothing of it because, well, it is trash after all. I had 2 bags of garbage in my hands, so I kinda have to kick the garbage can open. I kick it open, it flings open, and there is a sea of maggots. We're talking in the tens of thousands at the very least, maybe hundreds. I couldn't see any garbage beneath them. I had kicked it open with such force that many of them had flung out and onto me. I was wearing Old Navy flip-flops and oversized basketball shorts. Some actually flew up the leg of my pants from the kick and onto my bare feet. I dropped everything and screamed as loud as I've ever screamed before. I went into the driveway to dry heave, shake out my shorts, and I even started crying a bit. I have an incredible fear of maggots, and this experience had made it 10 times as horrible to me. My dad and stepmom got home from a movie as I was having my little meltdown in the driveway. He asked what was wrong, and I told him. He went to go see for himself. I heard a scream, and he ran back to the garage. I went inside to cool down a bit. He came back in 15 minutes visibly shaken. I asked him what he ended up doing, and he said, I just went to the garbage, got all the wasp, ant, spider, and snake-killing chemicals as I could, opened up the garbage with my eyes closed, and unloaded every single can. What had happened was that we had so much meat left over from the catering order, chicken parmesan, Italian sausage, etc., that we had to throw it all away, in the garbage. This was during July in Texas, so the meat had been rotting in the dry 103-degree heat for an entire day or 2. Hey, just so people are aware, if you ever end up with that much food left over, call up your nearest shelter of any kind and ask them if you can donate it. No wasted food, no maggots. Finally, an exterminator story. Walked into a house for a Roach startup. The walls moved. They were in the dressers, beds, closets, furniture, not to mention common areas like the kitchen and baths. Heck, they were in the walls. The place was an old, run-down, 5,000 plus square feet nightmare that I had to clear out single-handedly. 3 months of weekly 2-hour services, and I got things under control. Then the rat problem started. I wasn't too heartbroken when the service was canceled for non-payment. Went to an old woman's trailer for a routine pest control job. Spray the outside, put some granular down, simple stuff. Then she comes out of the house and exclaims she has roaches. Never been to the house before, was just covering for a coworker. So I go in and immediately I smell German roach infestation. So I look around and see all of these glue boards with 50 to 100 roaches on them. Pull out the fridge and there has to be at least 300 on the walls. I turn and look at this old lady and say, "Ma'am, how long have you had these?" She told me she has had them for 3 years, so I go around looking for the rest of the house and I'll list a few things I found. A back porch filled with cat food and cat poop. Very heavy termite damage in her roof. I ask her how long she's had the termites and she responds, "Since I moved in." And I ask her, "How long ago did you move in?" She replies, 22 years ago. The house is a death trap. And a family of possums living in the corner of the house. I told her we need to fumigate the house. It will kill the roaches and termites in one go, and she told me she is treating the termites herself with some crap she bought at Walmart. I told her I will come back to treat the house with my manager. Flash forward a week, and me and my manager spent 2 hours at the place, spraying and getting every crack and crevice we can. I'm still treating that house, and it's been 5 months. On a side note, the old lady obviously had dementia. She would go, "Oh," whenever I would tell her about basic hygienic living. I'm going back again next week, and if she hasn't changed, I'm ending her service with us, and she can live in that house and rot. Edit, I'll make an anonymous tip for the lady. What's the most insane coincidence you've experienced? Here before the comments are filled with, "Nah, that's not real, that didn't happen." I'm just reading what's on the thread, man. Cut me some slack. I was once mugged by 4 guys on one of the main shopping streets of Nairobi, Kenya. One of the guys had me in a chokehold, and just before I was about to pass out, they dropped me and ran. At the time, I didn't know why. 12 months later, sitting on a beach on an island in Thailand, I meet a British couple who did business in Kenya, and we start to talk about how dangerous it was getting for foreigners. They described an incident the year before of turning a corner and seeing a white guy being mugged and a shopkeeper who rescued him by hitting one of them over the head with a bat. They were in the street on the same day at the exact same time I was there. It was me who they witnessed being mugged. What are the odds of randomly meeting up on a beach in Thailand a year later? I live in Australia, and I have for almost my whole life, but I was born in Dubai. Every weekend in Dubai, my mom would take me to the Hilton Beach Club and sit me in front of the pastry chef and eat. We moved away from Dubai really early on, so I don't even remember much. Fast forward to 17 years of age, a new kid at school had just moved from a nearby town. We became friends, and we both loved cricket, and we practiced a lot together. My dad and I were giving him a lift home after we were practicing, and Dad asks, "Where were you born?" And he says, "Dubai." And the conversation continues, and I say I was too, etc. Then he says, "My parents used to be the pastry chefs at the Hilton Beach Club." And this blew me away. Here we were, 16 years later, halfway across the world, and every weekend I sat in front of his parents and ate what they made for me. To this day, I still get goosebumps thinking about it. I mean, what are the chances? A few years ago, I got into a cab heading out for the evening in downtown Toronto. Shortly after being dropped off, I realized I left my phone in the cab. I tried calling it with no luck. I called the cab company, but because I had flagged the cab and paid cash, they had no real way of knowing which cab I was in. I figured the phone was as good as done and went about my night. Many hours later, and having moved around the city quite a bit, I am ready to call it a night, so flag another cab. Sitting in the back seat, I start to think the driver looks familiar and realize that I'm in the same cab I took earlier. He hasn't found a phone, but I start looking anyways, and sure enough, there it is, jammed in the seat. Me and my flip phone were happily reunited, only for me to put it in a washing machine 2 days later. Wop, 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 wop. I have a similar story. I was going to a My Chemical Romance and Blink-182 concert back in college. I went with a couple of friends, and we got a hotel nearby Jiffy Lube Live in order to get plastered. I got some Wendy's on the way to the concert to eat in the parking lot beforehand, but left it in the taxi. I was drunkenly devastated. After the concert, we hail a cab and I get in, feel a brown paper bag at my feet, and look down. That beautiful ginger on the bag was smiling up at my inebriated eyes as if to say, I knew you'd come back. An American friend of mine by the name of Tom took his family on vacation to check out Antarctica. He met an Australian guy named Paul on Christmas Day in Antarctica. They didn't exchange contact info. A year later, Christmas Day, they take their vacation to Machu Picchu. He's looking down at a map when he hears, Hey Tom, how the heck are ya? It was Paul, taking his family on their annual trip as well. Never could explain this payphone incident. Saturday night out with friends. We decided to call my friend Al to see if he wants to join us. This was in England long before mobile phones, so we had to use one of the iconic red phone booths. Someone was already using it, so we had to wait a few minutes. Guy leaves and we cram in the booth. Now, in those days, in order to make a call, you would first get a dial tone, then call the number. When the person answered, you would hear a bunch of beeps, at which point you insert the coins. So I pick up the phone, but hear no dial tone. I hang the phone up and try again. Still no dial tone. Seems to be still connected to the previous call. I say hello to see if anyone is still on the line. Person answers, hello? It was my friend Al. He had just picked up his phone to make a call, and somehow, miraculously, without even dialing his number, we were connected. We all went to the pub after and tried to figure out how the heck this happened, but it remains a mystery. If I did not have my friends with me at the time as witnesses, I would have believed it was my mind playing tricks on me. In 2004, I was 18 and on a 3-week tour of Europe. I was at the Louvre and had just experienced the cluster that was the Mona Lisa exhibit. After looking at it for 2 minutes, I started to wander around aimlessly. As I was walking, an older couple asked if I knew how to get to the Mona Lisa exhibit. I told them yes, and because I'm horrible with directions, I'd be happy to walk them there myself. They were really nice and very appreciative that I was taking the time to help them. They asked me where I was from, US in Nashville, but I mentioned my parents were immigrants from Italy. They told me they were from Portugal on anniversary. We talked a bit more, told them my name, and they were really excited about it since I shared the same name as their grandchild. Anyways, we get to the exhibit, and I go to part ways and shake their hands, but get pulled in for 2 massive hugs and a kiss on the cheek. They give me their address and say anytime I'm in Portugal to stop by and I'll have a place to stay and eat. We take a group photo and leave. 7 years later, I'm in Munich for Oktoberfest. I'm standing outside my hotel waiting for my friends when an older couple asks if I know how to get to the fairgrounds. Again, I'm crap with directions, so since I'm headed there, I tell them they can just follow me and my friends. Again, we start talking about where we all are from. Now, I have a memory like an elephant, and once they mention they're from Portugal, I start to think maybe these are the same people. I ask them if they have grandkids, and they say they have 6. I ask if one of their names is History of a Man. They look at each other sort of surprised and say yes. They ask, how do I know that? And tell them that I had met them 7 years prior in Paris at the Louvre. The old lady gets really happy and starts crying and starts to hug me. They say they remember me now and asked why I never came to visit. That they had our picture in a frame on their wall and always wondered what happened to the nice American boy. We spent the next 3 hours drinking beers and catching up. Luckily, we got there early, so we were able to get an empty table, and they bought all the beers the entire time. This time, they demanded I give them my email so we could keep in contact. I even added their son on Facebook. 2 years later, I go and visit for the summer, and sure enough, there on the wall amongst the rest of their family pictures is 18-year-old me standing between them. I'll tell you all something. I'm a bit of an introvert and can be awkward when meeting new people, simply because I like to get a feel for who they are and where their boundaries are. But never in my life, other than with my own family, and maybe not even then, have I ever felt more at home and that I belonged than the 3 weeks I spent with them. We still talk weekly. It's like having a second family. In high school, my friend set me up with their boyfriend's cousin. Let's call him Jack. Jack and I were walking around an amusement park and started talking about recent family spring break vacations. Turns out, both Jack and I had been in Las Vegas during the same week. We stayed at the same hotel. The conversation changed subjects when Jack stopped in the middle of the sidewalk and said, "I saw you in Las Vegas." I thought he was full of crap. There's no way he would remember some random girl among the thousands of people there. He told me the exact place he saw me and that my sister and I were posing for a photo. We got back to my house and found the picture. There were Jack and his brother in the background. When I was in grade 2, our family moved from Manitoba to Arizona for a year due to a contract my dad was working. We rented out the house fully furnished for the year. While in Arizona, we flew to Alberta one weekend. On the flight from Arizona to Alberta, I sat beside a boy my age and we started talking. It went something like this. Me, what city are you from? Him, Winnipeg. Me too. What school do you go to? School name. Cool, I used to go there too. What street do you live on? Street name. I lived on that street. It turns out his family was renting our house while we were gone, so I was sitting beside the boy who was sleeping in my bed while we were in Arizona. When I was 13, I was on a family holiday in Venice. We were on a gondola touring the waterways of the city. We got halfway down a long passageway, and another gondola passes us by, carrying a man and a woman. The man and my dad lock eyes, exclaim one another's name, and have a quick handshake as our gondolas pass. Myself, brother, and mother sit quietly, pretty stunned, while the woman on the other boat explodes with, "What? Who's that? How do you know him?" We floated off in the other direction, comparatively swag and chill. Turns out it was a guy my dad went to university with and hadn't seen him since. They haven't even contacted one another since. It's crazy they recognized one another, considering they were both in their late 40s now, passing fleetingly on 2 gondolas in Venice. About 10 years ago, I tried to get into Six Flags with a tiny keychain Swiss Army knife. It literally had a dull 1-inch blade. They told me I could either throw it away, take it to my car a mile away, or rent a locker for like $10. So I decided to hide it in the planter. I looked down and saw a big piece of bark laying in the dirt and figured it would be a good hiding place. I picked it up and found another mini Swiss Army knife. I placed mine next to the first and went into the park. When I returned, the other knife was gone and a smiley face was etched into the dirt in its place. I went to a concert in Dallas and took 2 lawn chairs. They wouldn't let me bring them in, so being 6'5", I threw them on top of a very tall bush. No one would have even seen them, and hardly anyone will be able to reach them. As I'm pulling them down after the concert, I pulled down 4 of the exact same chair. I only brought 2 though. Up walks a guy who is as tall as I am, wearing the exact same Blink-182 tour shirt from 2009, and the other 2 chairs were his. It was pretty wild. We smoked a doob, did a tall guy high five, then parted ways. My family used to take little summer vacations. One summer, I was about 7 or 8. We stayed at a campground about 4 hours from home. There were a bunch of kids there, and one day we all started playing tag. I was it and was chasing another young boy, and when I tagged him, I pushed him too hard and he fell and broke his arm. I remember the scene vividly. Fast forward to college. I became good friends with my neighbor in the dorm, and we ended up getting a place together our sophomore year. The following year, no longer living together, we went out for a few beers and the topic of broken bones came up. I've only broken 1 bone, and it was my arm when I was 7. Some kid at a campground pushed me over while playing tag. It was me. Still can't believe it. Now is as great a time as any to recommend the movie Tag starring Jeremy Renner. It's really funny, and if you haven't seen it, go watch it. It's based off of a true story of these guys who had a tag gang going for like 30 years. And there are so many different crazy ways they all tagged each other. And it's got a surprisingly emotional message. One time I parked, without even noticing, next to a car with the same license plate as me. I had a Massachusetts plate, she had a New Hampshire plate, both with the same 5-digit number. The weirder thing was that both of us had kept the plate as a novelty plate because the state wasn't making 5-digit plate numbers anymore, but a family member wanted to keep it. In my case, my dad wanted to keep his dad's plate. My first semester of college, I moved out of state. I was first to move into the apartment and had a few days to myself. After orientation, I found my new roommate sitting on his bed. When I introduced myself, he asked where I was from. When I told him, he said, "I used to have a friend named Simon." I said I used to have a friend named Will. We were best friends in 1st and 2nd grade until his family moved. When I was in high school, I was aimlessly playing around our library one day. Like any large public high school, our library had literally thousands of books quietly tucked away in shelves and rarely, if ever, touched. That day, I pulled a book at random from a shelf in the back and sat down to read it. After opening it, a slip of paper fell out, and I quickly recognized the dashed 10 digits written on it as a phone number. I hastily read the number, and it was my older sister's number, who had graduated my high school years earlier. Someone wrote her number and tucked it away into a random book in the back until I found it years later. My great-grandmother fainted when my mother told her she was getting married to my dad because my great-grandmother had gotten engaged to a guy with the same name as my dad, and both men had been stationed at the same fort. But great-grandmother's fiancé died. Fortunately, mom's fiancé did not. This one's a long one, so strap in. I once went camping with about 5 or so other friends. This was about 3 years ago now in Pisgah National Forest in the mountains of North Carolina. There are some amazing waterfalls in this area, one called Rainbow Falls. It's about 125 feet from river above to ground below. If you keep hiking past Rainbow Falls, there is a much smaller waterfall in the river above Rainbow Falls called Turtleback Falls. It's basically a very slippery rock with water running over it, which ends with about a 4 to 5 foot drop. This is really cool because you can climb up it using a rope someone attached to a tree above, walk out to the middle of the rock, and slide down. There's also another spot that's about a third of the way up the side of Rainbow Falls, where you can climb up some branches, then basically rappel down a rock face, shimmy out on a ledge, and jump about 30 to 40 feet into the nice, deep pool in the river at the bottom of the waterfall. It was when my friends and I had climbed out on the ledge and were about to jump when we noticed that there was another group of people hanging out in the river below us. They started cheering us on and encouraging us to jump, as it is slightly terrifying. Anyways, we ended up jumping, and once in the river below, we talked to the other group of people. They seemed pretty cool. Fast forward 1 year, we had so much fun a year earlier that we decided to go back again. This time, we camped a little further down the river, and we decided to climb on some rocks downriver from the waterfall, about 300 or 400 yards from the waterfall. I was climbing on one rock and found something that looked like a strap of some kind. Assuming it was trash, I didn't touch it, but when I pointed it out to one of my friends, he noticed it was actually a GoPro camera in a waterproof case, so we decided to keep it. Fast forward a couple days, my friend and I purchased a charger for that type of camera and decided to see what was on it. We start watching the video and see some guys climbing up the place where we jumped off the side of the waterfall in front of the cameraman who was also climbing. The cameraman starts to get closer, and we see something that made us instantly start to freak out. On the back left shoulder of the person in front of the cameraman was the exact tattoo that my friend has. When it gets even closer, we realize that the person on camera was my friend, who I was currently sitting right beside. Later, the cameraman gets up to the ledge and we see me and the rest of my friends from over a year ago. There are also some pictures and videos of us jumping from the ledge. We watched the rest of the video in a stunned state, and the last 30 minutes or so of footage is of the cameraman going up to the river above Rainbow Falls and sliding on Turtleback Falls, apparently losing his GoPro in the water after going over the falls. The camera sinks to the bottom, and you can even see fish swimming by and staring at the camera. Now, think about where we found the camera 400 to 500 yards downriver from the bottom of the large waterfall. So apparently, this camera made its way downriver over a 125-foot waterfall and got lodged in a rock 500 yards away, and my friends and I found it a year later with video footage of us from the previous year on it. It took us a little while to decide on this as being the most reasonable explanation. Edit. A lot of people are wondering if I knew the cameraman. The answer was no, I did not. I suspect he was one of the people I mentioned being at the bottom of the river while we were about to jump. We jumped off this rock multiple times, so he might have followed us up one of the times, although I don't specifically remember this. As a college sophomore, I went on a trip to France by myself. I was sitting in Notre Dame Cathedral listening to music when a girl I dated in high school sat down near me, totally at random. We were both speechless when we saw one another there, out of the blue, in a foreign country within a vast cathedral. All while Quasimodo looked down sadly, knowing his only love forever out of reach. This coincidence is straight up sorcery. Was kayaking with my family along a river, when I thought I would pull a fast one on my brother. So I yell, "Hey look, a bald eagle!" to my brother so I can do the whole "made you look" game, but to my surprise, he goes, "Cool." At this point, I think he's just messing with me, so I can't say the whole "made you look" thing. So then I look up, and a bald eagle swoops down, catches a fish, and flies to the other side of the river. One of the most magical coincidences ever. I'm an American who moved to Amsterdam some years ago, and my first year there on a random Saturday, I decided to head out for a drink. Sat down next to a cute German guy who was in town for the first time from 6 hours away, helping a friend move kind of thing. And it turns out he's doing a PhD in physics. I'm doing mine in astronomy and have a physics background, so we spent maybe 10 minutes discussing our research topics when he mentions offhand how he used to study in New Zealand. I get a confused look and then get all excited. Johan, Professor W's E&M class in Auckland, first half of 2007. Freaked him out until I explained. I was a semester abroad student in Auckland that year, and not only were we in this same class, we even did homeworks together and such, but lost touch once I left the country, with no one having a clue what happened to the other, only to randomly run into each other 5 years later in a random bar in a random city on another continent. I don't know if I can ever top that one. It was pretty darn cool. I once burped 1 second before a power blackout in my neighborhood. It felt almighty. This happened to me a few months ago, and it was pretty darn improbable. I'm walking through Bay Area Rapid Transit. It's the train station that takes you to and from San Francisco and elsewhere, where an average of 375,000 people pass through daily. I walk up the escalator to my train and pass by an envelope lying on the ground. At first, I didn't think much of it, but I took a couple steps back to pick it up anyways. The next part freaked me out. I looked at the address, and it was addressed to me. I instantly look around to see if it was a practical joke or if I'm about to get assassinated or something. Neither of those were the case. The sender was a family friend. We'll call them the Johnsons. I knew that Mr. Johnson took the BART daily, but I had never personally ran into him. After work, I call him up and ask him about the letter. Turns out, he had about 300 letters with him on the BART and was going to send them out for his daughter's graduation party. What in the world were the chances of him dropping the one letter addressed to me out of the 300, combined with the chances of me being the one out of 375,000 people to pick it up? Pretty wild. I met my now husband at work. Turns out there are enough coincidences that my mom is seriously wondering whether we are distantly related. We were born in the same hospital 2 weeks apart. We then both moved about 500 miles away and ended up in the same university together. We moved from there another 100 miles away and worked in the same company. We both have relatives in the same area in Dublin. We both have a relative that worked in the same hotel in Dublin at about the same time back in the 1930s. My mom and his grandmother had the exact same combination of unusual first and middle names, and I have the same birthday as his mom. We don't live in Ireland. Edit, when I say birthday, I mean month and day. I am not old enough to be his mom. Also, I'm pretty sure I would have remembered giving birth. Have you ever correctly had a gut feeling to dislike someone who, on the surface, was a cool person that everybody else liked? What's that story? Content warning. A lot of these are going to involve a lot of inappropriate assault and some underage stuff. So if you're not comfortable with that, probably best to avoid this video. City Council hired another medic. Older dude with long hair, not that that matters. He was new to the scene, recently completing the course. Guy was awesome to hang out with. Went to the bar with the younger EMTs, played video games, etc. At first, I thought he was cool, but as I observed his work, I was his superior and did his probationary eval, I noticed something was off. At the private council meeting, I spoke openly about this in his 30-day review. I stated something was off. He didn't seem like a people person and generally the type that would do this job. They said that I had no grounds to state that he wasn't suited and that he did his job as described. I countered with the fact that when caring for people, being a people person is an unwritten rule, and that doing your job without caring leads to mistakes, and in our job field, a mistake means death. They weren't having it, so I finally said, look, in this job field, you need to learn to read people, and I'm telling you that something isn't right here. City Council told me that basically I was jealous because he got along with the EMTs. Honestly, I could care less. I'm not in this job for them. Fast forward a month and I get a call from an ER about an hour from us. They said that their report said the patient was administered 80 milligrams of drug X. The patient denied receiving it, and since they couldn't figure out why the heck the medic would have even given it, they ran a tox panel on him which showed that he did not receive it. The doc told me normally he'd let it slide as an error and asked me to speak to him about accuracy, but he felt something was off. I thanked him and after hanging up, pulled the trip sheets. Right in the run report, it has the drug, the amount given, and the time. I pulled up the narcotics log. It showed drug given and replenished along with the tag numbers. Next, I called a friend of mine who was a local cop and was off duty at the time. He came over and I opened the other medic's narc box. Sure enough, it had been opened and replaced. We then went through his logs for the past 2 months he had been working and located at least 12 times drugs had been given when probably not needed. I called the ER doc back and explained to him, and his exact quote, "Here's my personal phone number and our lawyer's number. I'll fax you over a written statement along with the test results. I'll see if we have anything on other patients he brought in." My buddy then called dispatch to tell the council members there was an emergency at the station and they need to come in. When they got there, we showed them all the evidence and what we suspected. Within 15 minutes, we not only had the DA approval, but also a judge sign an arrest warrant. Turns out the dude admitted to having a 20-year painkiller addiction. He ran out of sources, so he figured being a medic would give him easy access. He even told the judge he was worried that he would have killed someone just for the meds. At the trial, I was asked for what resolution I wanted. I told the judge, being a paramedic, I've seen how drugs change a person and that I don't hold him fully responsible. On my recommendation, he got 3 months in a locked drug rehab facility, followed by 6 months of house arrest. 4 years later, the dude is clean and runs a fundraiser to help raise money for the END to provide anonymous Narcan services and drug awareness programs. Today, this guy will be an honored member of my crew. Addiction literally changes people. The end result is I now am solely responsible for hiring the medics, reviewing, and dismissal. I no longer need to justify to counsel why someone was dismissed. This job is one where a gut feeling decides someone's fate. Sometimes our gut instincts are only sort of right. When I was in 7th grade, there was this girl who was really quiet and sort of creepy, and she smelled like crap, literally. She wore these odd dresses that looked like pioneer dresses, homemade, and she was just, well, creepy. No one talked to her. People tried to avoid sitting next to her. We all gossiped about her as being the epitome of creepiness. Then one day, she was gone. Didn't come to class. The next day, it was all over the news. The police had arrested these horrifically abusive parents who were neglecting and abusing their daughter and who had kept their younger son locked in a cage his entire life and never fed him. The younger boy was kept alive by, you guessed it, his older sister. The police were led to the house by neighbors' complaints about the stench. So this poor, smelly girl was suffering abuse from her parents, and all the while sneaking food and water to her little brother, who was literally locked in a cage for years upon years, keeping him alive, and then coming to school where she would be avoided and mocked behind her back and sometimes humiliated. She was a weirdo, and our guts all told us there was something wrong there. But she was a freaking hero. Never heard what happened to her after the parents were arrested. Hope she recovered. I never trusted my ex-BF's uncle. I just knew he was trouble and had issues with him visiting or my ex visiting him. He was arrested in Florida last year for production and selling meth and hosting a prostitution ring out of his home. Later learned the ex partook in all the activities at his uncle's home. Apparently my gut was right about the uncle, but not about my ex. My snake did. I had the sweetest, chillest ball python who never nipped or hissed or reared up or anything. She'd just curl up with you and hang out. One day, a friend brought over some of his friends, and all of a sudden, my snake went nuts, standing straight up in her tank and hissing at one of the guys. A couple of weeks later, that dude robbed my house while I was out of town. R.I.P. Guinevere, a good snake. Interviewing a guy for a job. Something doesn't feel right, but my interviewing partner really seemed to like him. We get to his portfolio of work, and I see my side project that I worked on alone as one of his websites. So I start asking him questions about it. What challenges he had, how the client was, etc. I let him go on and on. Then I say, I have to level with you. This is my work. You are showing me my own work. Look at the source near the footer. It has my website in the comments. He went ghost white, and I just sat there. After that, I coached him a little on how not to suck, and he left. We called the contract agency that sent him and let them know. My sister's first husband. I was 5 when they got married, and I only actually met him a few times in person because they lived on the other side of the country. My family really loved him. He was charming, athletic, smart, handsome, financially secure, and seemed like a great dad when they had kids. Plus, he was never anything but nice to me. But I always sensed something shady about the guy. When I was in the 5th grade, I remember getting in huge trouble for a class assignment, an essay describing our families, in which I described him as a bad person, pretty much word for word, quote, "There's something I just don't like about him." It was one of the only times I got spanked as a child. Well, fast forward a couple years, and my parents discovered that he'd been abusive to my sister and the kids almost the whole time. They ended up divorcing, and he has proven to be a complete sociopath ever since. He hadn't paid a dime in child support, despite being well off enough to buy a new luxury sports car every few years, and uses their 2 kids, who are now teenagers who know he's full of crap, to play mind games with my sister, bringing her to court for full custody, knowing he won't win due to his past, just to cause her inconvenience and rack up legal fees for her, just as an example. He also has refused to let the kids fly out to visit our side of the family a few times for no reason whatsoever. He's a jerkwad, a narcissist, a complete sociopath, and somehow, 10-year-old me was able to sense it before anyone else in the family. My mom brought her new boyfriend over the house one time for me to meet him. He weirded me out. I can't tell you why, but I didn't like him. Maybe it's because he was a 35-year-old man who wore visors. Friendly and funny guy who my family liked. A year into their relationship, he beat the crap out of my mom and stole her dog. Probably the closest I've come to an assassination attempt. Edit 1. I didn't go after him as not to implicate my mom. Also, we got our dog back. Edit 2. Yep, he's in jail. My childhood best friend's mother's boyfriend. He creeped me out and I hated being over at her house when he was there. Her family went on a ski trip with mine, and my parents both thought he was great, funny, charming, etc. They didn't understand why I didn't like him. Years later, my best friend told me that he inappropriately abused her starting when she was about 9. I probably was picking up on her fear of him. So my husband has this cousin, Jason, and he loathes them, always has since he was a small child. There are stories about my husband trying to beat Jason when he was 5. It was so bad that as an adult, my husband refused to attend any family gatherings that Jason would be, out of the fear that he would beat the living crap out of him. Nobody could ever figure out why my husband hated his cousin so much. He had never done anything to him. And my husband is the most laid-back and friendly person I've ever met. He genuinely likes everyone, except for this guy. I never understood it myself, never having met Jason. And anytime I would ask my husband about it, he would always say, I freaking hate that kid. He's not right. Jason was pretty well liked throughout the family, so my husband's position caused him to catch a lot of crap from other family members. I finally got to meet Jason a few years ago at my brother-in-law's wedding, and I saw right off what my husband was talking about. To the casual observer, there was nothing tangible that Jason did that he could put your finger on, but something was off. He would laugh and smile, but the smile didn't go all the way to his eyes. His eyes were just flat and empty, unless he was looking at the girls at the wedding. And when I say girls, I mean children under 10. When he looked at those girls, his eyes lit up with this sick little light. You know how someone who hasn't eaten in a long time looks when they finally get a meal they love set in front of them? That's how Jason's eyes looked when he looked at those little girls, like he was hungry and they were his meal. About 2 years ago, Jason's dad married a woman with 2 young daughters. Jason went off and volunteered to babysit. About a year ago, Jason was arrested and convicted of forcing himself on both of those little girls multiple times. Screw you, Jason. I wish my husband had beat you, you creepy son of a gun. When I played high school football, we had an equipment manager who had been doing the job for decades and was absolutely adored by the community. Guy was in his 70s or 80s. One day, I'm ready for a game early, so I head out to the bus that's taking us. I see him loading stuff up, so I offer to help him load a few things. Once we're all loaded on the bus, he walks to me in the back, because I was a cool kid, and hands me a Hostess cupcake in front of everyone as a thank you. He handed me the cupcake, looked me in the eye, and this sense of dread just falls on me. I have no idea why, and everyone's looking at me, so I act normal. I eat the cupcake, because I was, and still am, fat and will eat any cupcake you hand me, and just kind of write off the feeling. That summer, he was arrested for inappropriately assaulting some 15-year-old girl. I'm pretty sure they thought he did more, but couldn't prove it or something. While in the Army, we moved into a new house in upstate New York. We were being neighborly and talked to a guy across the street. He had 5 kids, no wife. He also had multiple neighborhood kids playing in the yard. He told us we can always send ours over. He gave us both this horrible feeling, so we smiled and got out. About a year later, my wife told me, I was in Kandahar, that his kids were taken from him. He had been touching them at least ever since his wife died. About 15 years ago, I worked in a small office, mostly men, all who I really liked. A new guy started one day, and instantly I had a bad feeling about him. I don't even know exactly why I felt that way, and all the other people seemed fine with him, so I did my best to be polite and find things to talk to him about. I was in my mid-30s. He was about the same or a little older, and we both had young sons, so I was able to find some common ground. Apparently he and his wife didn't live together. She might have been back in his home country, but I could never shake that bad feeling. A year or so later, I had left the company to have my second son, and a friend who had taken my place there called me one morning and said, "Did you read the paper today?" That man had been arrested in another state, apparently having been set up by an FBI sting online, where he had been chatting with who he thought was a 13-year-old girl and was meeting up with her. In the trunk of his car, they found a video camera and rope. I worked as a CNA in a nursing home during/right after high school. We got a new guy that made a lot of mistakes and obviously had some cognitive impairments. I'm not sure what was wrong exactly, but it was obvious that he was mentally slow. Leaving a patient with the feeding tube laying flat, increasing their chance of aspirating food into their lungs, for example. On several occasions, I complained about him to our supervisor and also vented to my coworkers that I just did not feel right about him. Everyone accused me of not having any compassion. They said he was slow, but that he would get it and I should be more understanding. They all thought that I was being judgmental because of his disability, but it felt like more than that to me. One night, another CNA went to answer a call light and walked in on him forcing himself on an elderly bedridden woman. He didn't even stop, just held eye contact with the coworker until he was finished. This all happened over 15 years ago. He went to jail obviously, but I saw him in Walmart last summer, so he is out now. I sure hope he is never able to work in a position to take advantage of vulnerable people ever again. Yes, but I suppressed it so quickly and fast because I felt like it was horribly ungracious since she was being so friendly. Over the next couple years, she became my closest friend in the new town I had moved to. Then the following couple years, it vacillated between being close but just feeling like she really didn't want me around or was messing with me a little bit. Turns out she was having an affair with my husband and was literally intentionally driving me crazy. There was a man that would walk around my neighborhood with samurai swords on his back. He also had a golden retriever that would follow him everywhere. As children, we were always intrigued by the swords and obviously wanted to pet his dog as well. He would never let us and yelled at us if we got too close. I'm at Chevron getting some gas and 20 cop cars surround a man by the dumpster. Turns out, this guy had just killed a woman in the woods of North Carolina, chopped her into pieces, presumably with the samurai swords, and was dumping the bloody clothes in said dumpster. His name was Gary Michael Hilton, and he's presumed to be the killer involved with numerous other backwoods murders throughout the Southeast. This one's going to be a long story, and is going to involve a lot of non-consensual content, but it will be the last story. My stepfather. He's my mom's third husband. Mom met him at a bar, a country bar she used to go dancing at, and saw him there for a while before deciding to introduce him to her kids. He took us all out to dinner that night, and we had a relatively good time. Then we all went back to the house. We weren't home long before I heard him and my mom giggling in the hallway, and suddenly I just felt sick. I was about 12 at the time, by the way. I'm not sure what it was, but suddenly I just hated this guy. My mom asked what was wrong, and I just said I didn't feel good and went to my room. Imagine the surprise of all of us kids when we woke up to see that this guy was still there. He moved in that very night. I tried to make the best of a bad situation, though I avoided him for some time. No more than a week later, he offers to brush my hair for me. We're all in the living room watching TV. I'm hesitant at first, but my mom encourages me. Apparently he had sisters and knew how to brush girls' hair. I kept my hair about waist length back then, and it was a pain to get the knots out, so I caved and let him brush my hair. He just brushed it, no big deal. So when he offered other times, I let him. Then one day, he offered while no one was there. Because my hair was so long, why don't I sit up on the edge of the chair in front of him? Oh, hey, would you like a back rub? I rub your mom's back all the time. I should mention this wasn't my first interaction with a perv, and I actually was very bothered just by being that close to someone. I hated being touched back then, but because everyone obviously liked this guy, I told myself I shouldn't cause any problems. Next thing I know, he says, "Can I rub down a little further? In front? It's your decision. You're completely in charge here." Thank God I had the courage to say no. I avoided him for ages after that and didn't have the sense to tell my mom or my brothers. This guy proceeds to find ways to get both of my older brothers out of the house by the time I'm 15. He goes long periods of time, seeming to be a perfectly good guy, and then out of nowhere hits me with something pervy and horrid. Sophomore year comes up and we get our class rings. Well, these rings are not cheap, and we've always been fairly poor. My mom says I have to ask Jerk, name changed, not so obviously, for the money. I ask him to buy my class ring, and he says, "What's in it for me?" I go silent. My mom is right there. She innocently says, "She can bake you a cake." I'm good at baking. He's quiet for a while and has to think it through. Then he says, "Okay, but there are rules." I forget what all the rules were, stupid stuff mostly. But his final rule was, if you lose this ring, you get naked. What? This is an expensive ring. It's a lot of money, so you better not lose it or you get naked for me. My mom tells him to stop, but only half-heartedly. When I try to talk to her about it later, she says, "Well, I guess you better not lose it." At that point, I kind of figured I couldn't count on my mom for help. Over the years, I've learned she was messed with a lot when she was younger and has convinced herself that all men are this way. I love my mom to death, but it kills me that she believes this. He's never stopped being a total jerk. I lived with them until I was 20. I was very shy, and having a job was very hard for me. I tried moving in with my oldest brother to help him take care of his kid, but after 3 months I was asking to come home and once again got the "what's in it for me" response. I got to hear all about how he'd lived the past few years just for me and mom, bought us a house and everything, and how ungrateful I was. I came back to what was essentially a prison. I had my nephew with me at first, as my brother was going to give my mom custody of him. That is, until my stepdad got mad at him and kicked him hard. A 3-year-old little boy who hadn't done anything more than annoy him, probably by making noise. So mom calls up my brother and tells him to come get him because she's afraid to have him around my stepfather. Then, once he's gone, she convinces herself that he never did that. Finally, I met my first boyfriend. By this time, I'm 20. I had gotten 2 part-time jobs and he worked at one of them. I was hanging out at his house a lot and my stepdad got jealous. He decided to give me a curfew of midnight and said if I break it, then I'm out of the house and can't ever come back unless I sleep with him because he knows I can't be a virgin anymore. I was, so there was no excuse now. I cried to my boyfriend, and he told me I could come live with him. This was after we'd only been seeing each other for about 3 weeks. That night, I didn't go home. My stepfather called me and screamed, called me stupid, and I screamed back and told him how he'd made my life a living hell. An hour later, he and mom pull up with his truck full of all my stuff that he could put in it. He took my car because it was mom's and dumped my stuff right there, telling my boyfriend I was his problem now. I will never forget the smirk on my mom's face when she hugged me and I apologized for everything. She said she wasn't mad at me at all, but was proud. Apparently, I'd had the guts to do what she couldn't. Of course, not long after I left, he finally proposed to her and they got married. It's screwed up to realize that the reason your stepfather didn't marry your mom is because he wanted a shot at you first. Anyway, this is way longer than I meant it to be, but the point is that everyone who meets this jerk loves him. They don't know who he is, just that he's personable and relatively smart. But I never forget that first night when for no apparent reason, I just felt sick at the thought of him. Edit. There was an update post somewhere in the comments. It was too long for me to post here, so I just did it as a reply. The TLDR is, no, I'm not with that boyfriend anymore, but we were together 7 years. Yes, mom is still with this jerk, but I never see him. She's afraid to leave him, but now that it's just the two of them, she sees it as her being the only one who has to tolerate his crap, and she's willing to do that for what she sees as financial security. She visits by herself, and no one questions why we don't go visiting there. Reddit, what did your parents teach you that you had to unlearn? Well, my grandpa told me that soda evaporates quickly, as in half the can in 20 minutes, when I was around 6. Took me like 10 years to realize he's been drinking my soda when my back is turned. I always drank my soda fast when outside or in hot places because of it. Wanting anything is selfish. Learning to undo this train of thought is the greatest feat of my life. It's still hard for me to attempt for first place in any form of competition. I always feel that someone else is more deserving, so I don't give it my all. If I do win, I'm always certain it was a fluke. This applies to my relationships in the worst way, too. I have a hard time dating because I'm convinced that if I date them, I would be taking them off the market and someone more deserving would be losing out. Or how I have a strong desire to be dominant in the bedroom, but I'm constantly guilting myself for wanting these things, so I either submit or beat around the bush. It doesn't matter what I want. I am undeserving, and to achieve is selfish and wrong. Screw that thought process. My mother told me that I had another middle name one day, Aloysius. I hated it, of course, but eventually came to terms with the idea. It was years later that she realized I had been writing an extra middle name on literally everything that required my full name, and asked me why I was doing such an odd thing. She had forgotten what she had done. When I told her, she laughed at me for about an hour straight, tears rolling down her face, laughing so hard she peed herself. Yeah, thanks. She taught me capsicum seeds were poisonous. They aren't. She really believes this one, though. Edit, yeah, I misspelled the name. You should have seen how I spelled it when I was 7. My grandfather thought it was hilarious to threaten me with renaming. He swore he would get my dad to change my name to Wolfgang Helmut IV if I misbehaved. I believed it wholeheartedly. Nobody in my family was ever named Wolfgang Helmut, and I am female. Could you imagine introducing yourself like that to people, though? You would have every right to put on the worst British accent you could and go, "Yes, hello, my name is Wolfgang Helmut IV. Charmed to meet you." My mother is convinced all clothes are too tight unless they are falling off of you. I looked like a ragamuffin for years until my rich sister-in-law pulled me aside and went, "Sweetie, I'm gonna take you shopping before you ever have to attend any job interviews looking like that." What food tastes like. Chicken is not supposed to be tough, dry, and chewy. Steak is not usually chewy, flat, and gray. There are more seasonings available than salt and pepper. Once I taught myself to cook, the world just opened up with new flavors and foods. It was the best. I personally resonate with this one because I love cooking and I wanted to broaden my horizons beyond just Southern American food where I grew up, and eating out of a paper bag every weekend is a treat. Once you open that door to a new culinary world, trust me, you'll want to try everything. To be a bystander, for lack of a better term, my parents are very against me standing up for others and even myself in some cases, and I had to learn that standing up for other people is the right thing to do. Also, how to pronounce cucumbers. For those of you wondering, they pronounced it cucumbers. Quantity over quality. Though my family was economically stable, privileged even, my parents grew up in poverty. So their way of buying was to buy cheap, which definitely should be taken into consideration, but ultimately, if the quality is not there, you end up spending more to continuously replace the item. We could afford to buy things of better quality that would last longer, but that's just not how they grew up. It still hurts me to spill $60 on a nice pair of shoes that will last more than a year, but I have since learned that I would much rather spend $60 this one time rather than getting 3 pairs of $20 crappy no-brand shoes that hurt my feet and fall apart every few months. That the garbage disposal will not trigger a nuclear reaction and blow up half the world within 5 seconds of being turned on without cold water running. That was a tough one to unlearn. I don't know, man. The way my dog reacts to it, I think it's gonna blow up. That you don't have to marry everyone you date. My mom was married 7 times and taught us that you never left anyone, no matter if they were horrible to you, took all your money, and treated your kids like crap. And that you could, quote, fix them if you married them. It took me a moving out and talking with other people to learn that is not normal and people break up all the time. Luckily, I never married any of those guys. They taught me to never disagree with anything. In my household, there was no such thing as no or why. Whoa, didn't expect this much of a response from the Reddit community. Thanks for the gold, strangers. I'm glad a lot of you are starting to be able to get over this bad programming and speak up if you disagree with something. Most parents want the best for you, and they do try their best, but they don't get everything right. Pretty much the same. My dad was abusive, and we all sort of just agreed with everything, because disagreeing or questioning anything led to yelling and throwing things and tantrums that lasted days. I grew up learning that the safest way to live was entirely unnoticed. So it took forever, even after I was an adult, for me to speak up, make my own choices, or do things I actually wanted to do. I still struggle with it a lot. That you should never do anything for others because nobody will do anything for you. I understand because my mom came from a very rough household growing up, but it was frustrating whenever she found out I bought lunch for my friends or gave someone a ride. It would always be the, nobody will look out for you, why do the same? That anger doesn't have to be the default reaction to anything you don't like. Someone has a different opinion, they're telling you you're wrong and stupid and you should be ticked. Someone makes an offhand comment that struck you the wrong way, they're jerks, you should be angry. Anything, anytime, anywhere happened that you didn't like for any reason, be angry. No thanks. It makes for a crappy life. Edit. Wow, you guys. I'm glad that this is something positive for everyone, and a lot of people have asked how to do this, for themselves or others. So instead of trying to reply to everyone, I'll give the short-ish answer here. First, realize that being angry at everything is going to make life pretty horrible. Then, it's just reminding yourself every time you have that gut reaction to ask yourself if it's worth it or not. 9 times out of 10, it's not. If it's situational, try and make the best of it as best you can, depending on the situation, obviously. If it's personal, try to see the other person's perspective. If they're just being a jerk, think of something you're going to enjoy doing later, smile, and wish them a great screw-off while you go about your day, because jerks aren't worth your emotional effort of being angry. I just want to add that minor inconveniences don't equal the end of the world. My mom does this thing where if eggs or whatever at the grocery store are really high due to inflation or high demand, she makes a big deal out of it and complains the whole time we're shopping. Like, I get it, stuff is expensive, but you're already buying 20 other things. You can wait on the eggs, Mom. My dad thought it was funny to teach my sister, brother, and I the wrong names to things. Sister confuses plates and bowls, brother confuses forks and spoons, I get confused with beetroot and capsicum. I get it right. Most of the time now. My mom is obsessively clean. It took me a couple years into my marriage to stop cleaning to her standards. I'm not a dirty person, but I don't have a fit about a little dust on the baseboards. She should see my carpet right now. I've been sewing. There are scraps and threads all over. She'd twitch. Cooking chicken. Until college, I thought that chicken was supposed to be dry. I hated it. My buddy cooked me chicken parmesan, and it was the best chicken I ever had. Turkey for me. I felt like a traitor to my family when I had Thanksgiving dinner with friends, and the turkey was better than I can ever remember my mom making, and she prides herself on her cooking. She was outdone by a guy a third of her age who was probably drunk for most of the cooking. I felt even more guilty taking my kids, both teenagers, there next time. We still do family Thanksgiving, but the 3 of us feel a little guilty about having more fun with 20 to 30 people crammed into a tiny apartment, most of them drinking and playing Cards Against Humanity and eating off of paper plates, than we do at a nice quiet table following all the traditions we followed forever. This is another one that hit home for me. When I was in college, I really started coming out of my shell as a human being and realizing that you can make friends and talk to them outside of class. It's because I'd always been pretty terminally online, so I wasn't really good at making friends. So having the chance to hang out with them, make and eat food with them, and play dumb party games with them, it was like I had found a new family. I like to reference the full quote, because people know this as blood is thicker than water, but it's actually blood of the covenant is thicker than water of the womb. Not to diss on anybody who's really close with their family, but sometimes having friends is your family. 10 out of 10 would recommend having friends. That just because someone is older than me doesn't mean that they know more than me. Yes, it's true that I don't have as much experience or knowledge about things in the world, but it is possible for me to know something that someone who is older than me doesn't know. My dad always used the I'm older / wiser / more experienced line if I said something, a fact or piece of information that he didn't agree with or think was true. It made me feel a little insecure about what I know and if what I know is right or not. My mom taught me that I had to respect my elders, even if they were possibly wrong because they were older and wiser. My dad, on the other hand, sat me down one day and said, "Son, people are stupid. Just because they are older doesn't mean they know crap from apple butter. I don't care how old they are. If they don't know their butt from a hole in the ground, it's okay to call them dumb. You're going to run into people who are smarter than you, but you're also going to run into people who will make you wonder just how in the world they managed to not drown themselves while taking a pee in the morning. You can know a lot, or you can know a little. A smart man knows that he doesn't know everything. He also knows the value of common sense." That I'm not done eating until the plate is clear. I think my parents had a really good system for this. When each of us kids reached an appropriate age, we were to serve ourselves and had to clear our plates. We quickly learned how to portion meals appropriate to our individual sizes and appetites. All things political. My mother's side of the family is a constant cycle of choosing the opposite side of the political spectrum to spite one's parents, not for any actual political reasons. That I'm responsible for everyone else's feelings. My parents are narcissists, and if they were ever in a bad mood, it was because of something I did. I've spent my whole life managing their emotions, learning what sets them off, learning the subtle triggers, making sure you don't ever step out of line or say something that they might misinterpret or take too personally. And not just with them. I had to do that with everyone so that I will be a, quote, good kid and not make other people angry, because being a, quote, bad kid would reflect very poorly on them, and we can't have that. I now know that other people's emotions aren't my freaking problem, but I still feel responsible for my parents. It's tough. Korean fan death. For those who don't know about this, Korean people believe that if you sleep with the fan on with all windows and door closed, you will die. Still can't convince my parents that this is a myth. So I would be super dead? I've slept with the fan on since I got hamsters 8 years ago. They are long gone and I haven't gone back. I can't sleep in total silence now. Edit. My most upvoted comment by far. And to answer why, it was because those little jerks had a squeaky wheel that they only used at night, on top of general rustling. Anyway, one of them killed the other, so the survivor was cast out into the wilderness many years ago. No, nobody believes me when I say this. It's always hamsters that die the weirdest deaths. I swear to God, you can't go 5 minutes without someone telling a hamster story, and they end it with like, oh, I boiled my hamster alive because he crawled into the pot while I was making mac and cheese. It's never a natural death. You never hear about a hamster growing old and dying naturally. It's always really, really weird. I do not have to say sorry for everything. I used to say I'm sorry for everything. Reached for the same cookie? Sorry. We had different opinions and you're frustrated? Sorry. Didn't grab the right bag of groceries out of the truck? Sorry. I said sorry for everything. Even when cashiers didn't have nickels to give me back a change, I apologized for me causing them that inconvenience. Unlearning that is still a struggle at times. It's times like this I am reminded of a wise man. Do not be sorry. Be better. Thank you, Kratos, God of War. That loud noises and roughhousing caused the cake to not rise when baking in the oven. Come to find out 20 years later, it was just a lie to get us to be quiet. Now that I think of it, they got quiet kids and cake. Scratch that, I'll remember this instead and use it in the future. That it's okay to want affection, and that it's not normal to be surrounded by fighting all the time. That I'm not a special snowflake. Being, quote, smart and talented stopped mattering around age 17, and it felt like a fraudulent cut-up until I learned how to work and apply myself. Shoutouts to all my gifted and talented kids with severe depression and anxiety, let's go! How to money. They never dealt with credit cards, student loans, etc. What they taught me was superficial, and some of their strategies put me deeper into debt. Took years, but dug out. My credit is great, and I'm actively saving every month. To always assume the worst might happen. My parents are conservative in every way, shape, and form. Like, no, Mom, just because I'm out having a good time with my friends and don't answer my phone doesn't mean that I'm dead. Now that I'm 100% independent, I'm learning that sometimes risk equals reward, whereas my parents had taught my siblings and I that risk usually leads to demise. I feel like I have to say sorry for all my commentary, but I really have a lot to say in this one. When I told my parents I wanted to go to a convention in another state with some online friends, my dad freaked and said that I would get trafficked. Like, there's a certain amount of risk that comes with flying in an airplane, being around people you never met in person, and being in a city, but you should expect your 24-year-old son to be a little more aware of what's happening than you think he is. By the way, had a fantastic time, and I'm going to another one with the same friends here in a few months. That men should be busy doing manly stuff and that taking care of / entertaining the kids is women's work. Screw that. I hang out and do stuff with my kids every chance I get. What's the point of having them if you don't want to spend time with them? That you can always do better. Not that that's intrinsically bad, but when you don't learn to stop and appreciate what you've accomplished, you'll never be satisfied. Eat crappy. We never ate vegetables. Always starches and crap. So much processed BS. I'm 28 and finally have managed to restrain my palate to eat vegetables regularly. I do my best to eat plenty of veggies every day of all different types, and I'm very concerned with my health and fitness. Passing this on to my son is super important to me. All the time she called me a spoiled brat when I cried because we were eating ramen every night and I had no clothes to wear to school and problems with my lungs because the crappy house we were in had black mold, but we could somehow magically afford $60 to $80 of liquor for her boyfriend every week. That's some crap I am still unlearning. The bit I'm unlearning is that it's okay to voice your unhappiness. You are not spoiled for wanting decent living conditions. It's okay to accept gifts/help from other people. It does not make you a bad person and does not mean you are using them. Not accepting that my daughter is truly sorry for what she's done until she cries. When we were kids, if my sister or I broke the rules, we would get the wrath of dad come down on us. Anything besides ending up crying was disrespect or not taking the telling off seriously. My dad is from the Pacific Islands. Not that this in any way excuses him, but it's what he was taught. Children are disrespectful, parents are there to put a stop to it. I've caught myself early on, and I'm learning to turn myself around. Anger management, parenting courses. But I can hear my dad coming through sometimes, and it frightens me. I'm trying to stop the cycle. I can feel the irrational anger starting to come out if I'm telling our girl off and she just dismisses me. But I make it a point to be the adult in the situation, and remember that it's her age, and that she's learning. Side note, he's since changed a lot and is a fantastic and doting grandfather. I just don't want to carry on traits that I grew up with from his earlier years. When someone annoys you, cut them out of your life, permanently. Don't do this. Obviously, this is on a post where you're meant to unlearn what you've been told. In a real-life scenario, it's worth working out what annoys you most of the time. Because most people are going to know how to apologize and not do that annoying thing again. You just got to be simple and upfront without bashing them. But if you're online and somebody is bothering you, the block button is right there, especially if they're talking to you about some BS that you don't care about and they've just messaged you on Twitter for the first time. Okay, when I was a toddler, my dad used to play this game with this rhyme, where he'd recite 4-acre, eye blinker, nose stopper, chin bopper. Poked my forehead, the spot between my eyes, the tip of my nose, and then my chin. And then like a year or so later, my mom and I were in the car and I said something like, "Mom, my 4-acre hurts." And she looked at me and I was like, "Honey, that's your forehead." I looked back at her like she was insane and argued with her. "No, it's my 4-acre." And she had to answer me back, "No, sweetie, it's your forehead, really." And I argued the point with her for half a minute before I realized that all this time I had been convinced that my forehead was actually called my 4-acre. Let's end this on a long one. They instilled in me that all I had to do was go to college and get through it, and then I'd get, quote, my job that would pay $60,000 with benefits, and then I worked there until I retired, didn't matter what I studied or if I networked or pursued extracurriculars. Just finish school and you get your job. When that didn't work, put in more applications. I graduated in 2008 when there was no economy, with a useless degree and no extracurriculars or internships, and a GPA that was too crappy to even consider grad school. I've spent the last 8 years figuring out that this is now a hustler's economy, and you don't make money by applying to places and sending out your resume unless you're looking for a $9 an hour job at a sandwich shop. You have to develop actual skills, be good at BSing, talk to people, keep your eyes and options open, be willing to expand your skill set, keep an eye on what skills are marketable, not be afraid to jump into something just because you've never done it before, realize that employer loyalty is a two-way street that is permanently closed and has been for years, etc. Every good job I've ever had has come from a lead that a friend has given me. None of them have come from shotgunning my resume to every pyramid scheme in the Craigslist classifieds. Basically, I had to learn this entire skill set and mindset that was completely alien to me, and unlearn the notion that you just step off the graduation stage with your bachelor's in English and start courting job offers from all the places that are eager to hire a guy whose main selling point is that he's literate, like extra literate. What's something that's common knowledge in your workplace that will be mind-blowing to the rest of us? Disclaimer, this thread was made 11 years ago. Please use discretion if you decide to follow any advice given in these responses. There's a good chance that it's incredibly outdated by now. With that being said, let's move on to the video. For example, I'm not in law enforcement, but I learned that special units such as SWAT are just normal cops during the day, giving out speeding tickets and breaking up parties, contrary to my imagination where they sat around waiting for a bank robbery to happen. The fajitas at Chili's aren't actually sizzling. They have a sauce called, quote, sizzle sauce, that you spray over the hot food so it gives the illusion that it is sizzling. When you have an IV placed, there isn't actually a needle left in your arm. The needle is taken out and a tiny, flexible plastic tube is left in. So many people think that they are walking around with a needle in their arm and are afraid to move it around. Chemistry grad student. Safety regulations happen when EPA inspectors come by, not any time else. Casino dealers are not out to take your money. We live off tips. We want you to win. Strawberries are picked by hand. It sucks. 2/3 of Staples' annual profits occur during the 2 to 4 week period of back-to-school shopping. Technical writer. Lots of people work really hard to write all those electronics manuals that you don't read. Also, manuals are considered legal documents. If a client injures themselves following a set of bad instructions, the company can be held accountable. If you're going to the dentist to get work done, fillings, crowns, etc., and you use cocaine, tell your dentist. Cocaine use, within the 24 hours or even more, plus dental work equals medical emergencies and often death. So, moral of the story, don't do coke and then get a filling. Or just don't do coke in general. I feel like telling people not to do hard drugs is pretty good advice. If you knew just how much money was dumped down the drain in emergency medical services for non-emergent calls and straight up BS, your head would explode. I work in a rural system, and I've seen people burn more money in a year than they would ever make in their entire lives on EMS that they aren't paying for. This is for routine or made-up stuff. I just remembered this from my days as a car salesman, and I have never been happier from being fired from a job than the day my sales manager said, "You're a good guy, but this isn't going to work out." To see how much that used car really is, look for a sticker. Ours were red on the windshield and look for a number. Example, 191-377-499. The first and the last two numbers are the model year. The numbers in the middle is the price that the dealership sets. Anything above that is going to be commission for the salesman. Haggle accordingly. If you make a lane change on the highway and cut close in front of my big rig, you aren't making me mad. You are scaring the crap out of me. Because if you blow a tire or if anything else causes you to sharply lose speed at that moment, I will roll over you like a 40-ton avalanche and they will have to wash you and your children out of the wreckage with a hose. I work as a barista during the school year. One thing that a lot of our customers don't seem to know is that the dark roast coffee actually has the lowest amount of caffeine on the roast spectrum. So many night shift workers will come in right before we close and ask for the darkest roast we have because they need to stay up all night. We always correct them and assure them that our lightest roast has the most caffeine. I think people assume that dark roast has more because it has a stronger coffee taste. So they think that a stronger coffee taste equals more beans used to make it equals more caffeine. Not quite. We used 80 grams of beans, no matter the roast, to make around 2.3 liters of coffee. At the shop where I worked, I'm sure this is the same for many other coffee shops as well, dark roast coffee and light roast coffee are made from the same beans. Dark roast coffee, as the name implies, is roasted the longest. The beans get that bitter and burnt taste, but more caffeine is burned off in the process. Since light roast is not processed for as long, more caffeine actually stays in the coffee beans. TLDR, if you need to stay up all night, light roast coffee has the most caffeine. Geneticist here. It is estimated that about 10% of children in genetic studies are, quote, non-paternities, meaning 10% of the kids in the studies don't have the same biological father as we are told they have. Edit, wanted to clarify some things. This could happen when children aren't informed a sperm donor was used, the children didn't know they were adopted, or some other mix-up. The 10% comes from genetic disease studies, not just paternity testing. The 10% figure is often quoted in scientific articles, but some studies have been published which suggest the 10% figure is an overestimate. While it is not possible with current technology to revive large organisms that have been cryogenically frozen, it is entirely possible to revive cells that have been cryopreserved. It gets cooler. We can store cells in a deep freeze state about -200 Celsius and bring them back years later. The cells will thaw, grow, reproduce, and continue on their respective merry ways as if nothing out of the ordinary ever happened. Edit, woke up to a bunch of replies, so I'll clarify some of the top questions. Number 1. Why don't the cells burst? We use a cryoprotectant before we freeze down the cells. This prevents the water in the cells from crystallizing when it freezes. We stick the cells in special vials and put the vials in this temperature-regulating chamber that looks something like a large revolver chamber. This slows the freezing process to an acceptable rate. Once the cells reach negative 80 degrees Celsius, they are taken out of the regulating chamber and transferred to negative 200 degrees Celsius. Number 2. What's preventing you from scaling this up to animals or humans? Let me preface this answer with the disclaimer. I am not a cryogenicist. Part of my job involves storing cell lines in cryogenic states. That being said, the biggest obstacle to overcome if we were to revive frozen people would be the brain. Cells don't have brains. Cells don't even have organs. You may argue from high school biology that they have organelles, but that's not the same thing. Cells are essentially macromolecular machines. You can leave your car sitting in the driveway unattended for a couple years, and it will still run when you come back. Might need a jump or an oil change, but the analogy holds. Number 3. What cells are we talking about here? Malignant ones. Various assortments of cancer cell lines. They tend to grow a bit faster than their non-malignant counterparts and, quote, recover from freezing faster. But both malignant and non-malignant cells will recover and grow after freezing. The throttle of go-karts is located just above the motor and can make your cart anywhere from 5 to 10 miles per hour faster. I've worked at multiple retirement homes. The senior citizen residents hook up with each other quite frequently. I work with children. In regards to potty training, kids are more likely to be able to go if their feet are on a flat surface. If you don't have a potty chair for them, give them a step stool or a box or something so their feet don't dangle. Helicopter auto-rotation is something designed for and tested during helicopter development. The Helo is able to perform various maneuvers, fly forward at X speed, turn left/right at X speed, Y bank angle, etc., without engine power. Helicopter pilots routinely practice these, and not just pray the aircraft comes to the ground softly if power is lost. The reason a lot of military units have massive budgets is because the defense funding system works on a use-it-or-lose-it system. We may not need our full budget one year, but we're a deploying unit that is deploying next year and will need it then. If we don't spend it all by September 1st, the fiscal year starts October 1st. When the new budget comes out, we will have reduced funds. So units frequently spend all the money they are allotted in order to have guaranteed funding for when they need it. If the system didn't punish units for being frugal and made it easy to acquire funds needed for training and equipment, we could reduce spending quite a bit most of the time. 90% of professional brewing is cleaning things. Beer is simple and a naturally occurring substance. We just make it easier for the yeast to do their job by monitoring temperatures, anticipating problems, and cleaning. It's honestly hard to add to this thread. It's common knowledge where I work. For instance, opening a tank of fermenting beer to, quote, see how it's going will probably make you pass out from CO2 inhalation and, worst case, kill you. We frequently get drunk college students on tours asking if they can go inside a tank of beer. No, you will die. Also, we don't spend all day drinking beer and looking at samples. Mostly, it's lifting heavy stuff, cleaning, getting dirty, moving heavy stuff, and did I mention cleaning? Content warning, animal death. From working at a kennel, a lot of places only have a few sizes for coffins should you want the kennel to bury your deceased pet for you. If your pet is too big to fit one, he/she will be made to fit in it. Working at a few vets, I have no idea how common knowledge this is, but I had no idea until I worked there. But if you see an injured animal on the side of the road that isn't yours, you can bring it into most places and they will treat the animal at no cost to you. If the animal dies, it will also be buried at no cost to you. Good Samaritan laws or something like that. If your animal has gotten into illegal drugs, just tell us. We don't care. Our business is treating your animal appropriately as fast as possible. Just freaking tell us. It will save you money in the long run since we don't need to go through so many wild diagnostic measures, and your poor balls-tripping pet can get its system cleared before anything too bad happens. If your cat is in for treatment and bites one of us and has not had or is overdue for its rabies vaccine, the animal will be contained after the bite, and if it shows symptoms, it will then be euthanized and put down. This is purely personal, but if your pet is at a certain elderly age, 12 plus, and having major issues, please just consider euthanization. The amount of money you'll spend on the insane amount of treatments to keep your pet alive for another few months is not worth it. And the amount of suffering the animal endures from all the treatments is also not worth it. So many animals come in that would really be better off going peacefully into the bright light, but owners just can't let go. It's frustrating to watch. Most private colleges, especially those with high endowments and a considerable amount of prestige, will send a list of each year's applicants to their communications/development office. They'll research the kids and their families and give them a rating based on the potential the kid has to add to the endowment, basically an assessment of family wealth/potential. This is used more to distinguish between the multitude of wealthy kids who apply to such colleges. If you're poor, most schools will see that as added diversity and will help your chances at acceptance. I worked in a cardboard factory for a while, taking huge rolls of paper and gluing/baking them into cardboard sheets, boxes, etc. That warm, delicious smell that comes from your closed takeaway pizza as you drive home, it's mostly not the pizza. It's the sugar, starch, and animal fat in the cardboard and glue. The cardboard factory smelled exactly like takeaway pizza. Former prison guard here. Most inmates do not have access to weights more than 2 to 4 times per month, and only if they've earned it with good behavior. The going rate for cigarettes on the prison black market is $100 a box. If you are willing to go a few years without any friends, and you have about $100 a month of expendable income, depending on your crime, you can go your entire sentence without being in a fight or joining a gang. Non-consensual penetration happens in prison, but it isn't nearly as common as it was 30 years ago. Inmates have an anonymous hotline they can call if they want to report, and now there are cameras almost everywhere except for cells. That's where most penetration happens, and there's not a lot prison guards can do to stop it. 95% of what you see in prison TV shows or movies is creative thinking. Your first day in prison, I do not recommend picking a fight with the biggest, toughest looking guy in prison, or fighting with the first person who's a jerk to you. It won't make you look tough. More likely, you'll just go to seg for a few weeks before getting kicked out into a new unit, where you'll have to do it all over again. Instead, find out who is in charge of your race. If you're white, it'll probably be Aryan Brotherhood or Peckerwood. Then either join up or ask how much it costs to be protected. This is called paying rent. You won't make any friends paying rent, so plan on reading a lot. If you don't have the money or the desire to be extorted, you can join the gang. I wouldn't recommend this unless you're going to be down for a long time. You'll start out on the bottom of the prison gang hierarchy. After initial training period of working out, you'll be asked to do hits on enemies of the gang. The shot callers will tell you who and when you'll be attacking, and you'll be expected to follow through. The problem with this is that you'll likely be given additional time on your sentence, so if your goal is to get out of prison, this isn't the recommended route. Plus, you'll be required to get gang tattoos, which will make it difficult to live normally after prison, and are often accompanied with hepatitis C, HIV, and tuberculosis. It depends on the state, but guards in the towers are carrying weapons with live ammunition. Prison guards tend to be rednecks with fairly good aim. If you're going to kick someone's butt, don't do it in the yard. If you are perceived by a tower guard as putting someone in a position of substantial bodily harm or risk of life, you will be killed. Perimeter towers are also armed with live ammunition. If you are going to try to escape, your best bet is tunneling out or stealing a guard uniform or impersonating a staff member, etc. Over the fence will probably get you shot, unless you have friends who have bribed the guard in the tower. If you're in for anything inappropriate, you're gonna have a bad time. TLDR, don't go to prison. It sucks. Wendy's actually cracks and cooks a fresh egg every time you order a breakfast sandwich, and the chili does not come out of a can. Yeah. I see you, Wendy. I see you commenting on that Reddit post. You're not fooling anyone, pigtails. Lie to me all you want, but we know that fresh, never frozen beef is a cover-up. What next? You gonna tell us you raise chickens in the back? You have a garden where all your vegetables come from? Does Wendy herself slaughter the cow? I've got my eye on you, pigtails. This war ain't over. And now it's time for the men of Reddit to leave the room because this might make you cross your legs. When a urinary catheter is placed, a tiny balloon is then filled inside the bladder so the catheter stays in place and doesn't, quote, slip out. If a catheter is pulled out before the balloon is deflated, it shreds the urethra and is a bloody mess. Don't ever pull out your catheter. Ever. Update, another fun fact about catheters. For men, it is best for them to be hard. It makes placing the catheter a lot easier. So if a nurse has ever said thank you while placing a catheter in your semi-erect dingling, you know why. Failing a student is absolute agony for most professors. We will often look for any loophole we can find to let you pass the class, because frankly, having to tell you that you're failing is one of the worst things we will have to do for our job all year. We think about you when we turn in our grades, and we torture ourselves about it afterward. Unless your professor is truly a jerkwad, when you fail a class, you have legitimately failed that class. P.S. Grading papers takes a really long time. Coca-Cola employee here. Fun fact, that crisp, sharp smell that Coca-Cola and Diet Coke give off, strictly phosphoric acid. When I worked at AMC, we don't clean the theaters after every movie. We just sweep the popcorn under the seats, try to pick up all the big trash, and put all the armrests down. Cinemark is much more demanding. Every kernel of popcorn must be eliminated. I worked at an optometrist's office for about 2 years and sold glasses. We sold more high-end stuff, but had basically everything. What some people don't realize is that if your prescription is really strong, you should shell out the extra money for the better lens material and maybe for that anti-reflective coating. It will make a huge difference in clarity, especially if you drive at night. If you have a really low prescription, screw it, get the cheap lenses, you won't notice. Also, if you wear contacts, freaking give your eyes a break every now and then. If you wear them for the moment you wake up until right before you go to bed, your eyesight will get way worse way faster. You risk serious infection, and you're kind of suffocating your eyes. Even if you have the kind that you can wear for 30 days straight, you sure as heck better have at least one pair of crappy glasses you can wear if you ever tear a lens into your eye or lose/run out of contacts. Healthcare worker. If we have to phone a patient at home and someone else answers, we are not allowed to identify where we are calling from or why. So, say we need to ring John Q. Citizen and his wife answers. Then we can only say, "May I speak to John Citizen, please?" Wife will ask who it is. Our name. Wife will ask, "Where are you from?" Or, "Why do you need to speak to John?" "I can't discuss that with you. Could you please put John on the phone?" Etc., etc. It causes so many issues. We would love to just say I'm calling about his blood test, but we are legally not allowed to do so. I'm not being obstructionist or rude. Please just suck it up and pass the phone over. When you visit a single page of Amazon.com, or pretty much any large-scale website, no less than 30 computers put the page together. We're talking servers that have sub-millisecond round-trip times between nodes. When they reboot, it takes an hour to refill the cache, so all results from those machines are discarded until 99.9% of the results are instant. At Outback Steakhouse, they will prepare your food however the heck you want. They'll put your sirloin in a blender if you want. Get creative. Edit, I think Outback owes me a gift card or something for all this free advertising I just gave them. I can confirm this. I once ordered a BLT, which isn't on the menu, at Outback Steakhouse, and my waiter asked me what I wanted on it. I was dumbfounded. I'm just a cashier and don't have the power/authority/ability to do most of what you want or expect me to do. I'm gonna end this on an extremely long, extremely unnecessary inkjet cartridge rant. I work for a major ink and toner remanufacturer. Guys, really, just stop goddamn printing stupid stuff. You don't need it. You are getting raked over the coals, even by me selling remans to you at 40% off. A 5,000 milliliter bottle of our most common ink costs us $120. HP60s are our most common cartridge. They will only hold 6 milliliters. 6! We sell them for $10. Also, those cartridges are garbage. For the love of everything you find holy, stop buying HP's junk. They are made to fail to make my job harder. And since they fail on the consumer too, they just make their lives harder. Why keep giving money to a company that is actively malicious towards you? Buying an inkjet printer that is an ink tank style system will save you countless dollars and headaches, if it is a Canon or Brother. Lexmark and Epson are made to self-destruct and are also less cost-effective than Brother or Canon. These new HP 950/951s self-destruct. The 564, 920, 940 didn't, but HP made those all to be miserable to operate when using remands. For many integrated printhead carts, or drums in the case of the toners, you pay a premium to replace the printhead each time when you don't need to. HP 21, 27, or 56 carts have a page counter on them of somewhere around 2,200 to 2,500 pages. I've had older 56s stop working for customers due to the page counter before the printhead wore out. My test machine doesn't check the page counter, so it could give me a perfect print, but the actual printer will check the counter. Also, in those 21, 27, 56 cartridges, HP changed the composition of the ink to where it pretty much destroys the printhead. These make my job miserable at times, but I have worked it out to have about an 80% success rate on them now. Lexmark, Epson, and HP, and Kodak, but I'll have self-destructing cartridges. Epson for a while had self-destructing printers. Lexmark also installs a process called LexBCE that makes your print spooler dependent on it. Good luck. Lexmark are the highest cost to operate printers by far, the least reliable/lowest quality, and the most scummy company out of the bunch. Brother are generally the least expensive and have the least issues because they keep things simple. An inexpensive to operate Brother will suit most any home consumer's needs. I am not being paid by Brother. I just like that they are the least crappy to the consumer. Honestly, the only time I recommend something other than Brother is when my customer wants to print photos. Then I recommend a Canon ink tank style system. The current generation are the PGI 225/CLI 226, and they are good little cartridges, and I have sold hundreds, and can count the chip failures on one hand with fingers to spare, and even those shocked me. Now please Canon, don't make me look like a fool. If you can find an old HP printer that took the 45 or 78 cartridges at Goodwill or wherever for cheap, it's probably worth the investment to grab it. Yes, the 60s are quote cheaper, but the 45's OEM are about 35 for 42 milliliters of ink, where the 60s are about 15 for 6 milliliters. You are getting conned hard on quote cheap ink. I'm looking at you too, Kodak. Lexmark and HP send out firmware updates without your knowledge that disable your ability to use aftermarket products that are entirely legal to use. Remands are, counterfeits are not. I'm sure it mentions it in that EULA you didn't read. My job is far, far more complicated than just shoot some ink into it, no matter what those stupid advertisements from HP claimed. Everything gets electronically tested, cleaned thoroughly, tested again, filed under vacuum, and tested again. Quote, just shooting ink into it works about 1% of the time if the cartridge just ran out of ink. When I tell you I need your empties back to keep up my stock, I mean it. I'm not trying to screw you out of your little Office Max rewards. I need your empties back to do my freaking job. Finally, one of my good friends works at a big box office supply store. Stop grousing to these people about the cost of ink. There was almost no markup on it whatsoever at the retail level. If you're paying $40 for a stinking 12 milliliter Lexmark 16 at Staples, Staples probably spent $39 on it. Some of this, while mundane to me now, elicits a response from my customers, so hopefully it fits into the discussion. TLDR, I know way too freaking much about inkjet cartridges. What is your best met the high school jerk/bully as an adult story? I own my own gym and have for a few years now. I received a message one day from a familiar-looking name on the business's Facebook page from a woman asking to come try us out. We set it up, she comes in for an introduction. She's a very, very large and out-of-shape woman at this point. After about 5 minutes of working with her, it hits me that this lady used to be about half her current size and was an absolute bee back in her heyday. I decided not to bring it up to her as she appeared to be struggling in life and came to us in a time of need, and I took it, as I do with all of my clients, as a cry for help. Not to mention, I'm a grown man now, and that seemed pretty silly and insignificant in life today. Months later during one of the classes, I noticed her struggling real hard, so I go over to offer some encouragement. As I lean down to say something to her, I notice she's crying faintly to herself. She looks up at me and quietly says, "Sorry for how nasty I was to you years ago, and thank you for doing this for me." Turns out an old mutual friend told her about my place and she recognized me as the owner and came to me on purpose. No, not a story of revenge or retribution, but she reached out to someone she was terrible to, and today, she's repurposed, and I find it to be quite inspiring. Not quite the same, but about 10 years ago, I caught my dad screaming at the TV. This freaking jerk got his own show! He was such a piece of crap when we were kids. He would beat you up for your lunch money, push you for no good reason, take your toys, and based on the way he acts now, it doesn't seem like he grew up much. He was talking about Paul Toodles Sr. from American Choppers. We met at a bar where a large number of our high school class happened to be. He described me as his arch enemy. I realized I hadn't even thought about him in 10 years. She got the whole middle school through junior high to call me gay. I was not gay. She is. She came out of the closet right after high school. I was a jerk in high school. Then I went through the karma-mandated fat phase. Made a guy's day when he saw me at work. I went from pretty dang fine in high school to man the harpoons. I'm also nicer. He came in and said, "Wow, the fanciful unicorn?" And I said, "Yep, does this make it feel better?" and spread out my arms. He responded, "Heck yeah, you were a jerk." I said sorry. I was pretty immature. And then we talked like normal adults. Moved to a new school in 7th grade and was doing fine. Making friends, good grades. Then somehow ran afoul of this bigger kid. He'd been held back a few times. Typical bully, pushed little kids into lockers, loved to torment girls, and ran with a pack of acolytes who adored and aped him. In Texas at the time, if a kid didn't like you, he, quote, called you out, challenged you to a fight after school. Well, Zed calls me out one day because I was a, quote, queer from New York. Clueless me, moved there from said New York where people are civilized. I said, sure, okay. A few days later, in front of his acolytes and a small group of my friends, he proceeds to beat the crap out of me. It was 7th grade, so the damage wasn't excessive, mostly to my pride. Spent the rest of middle school known as one of the guys Zed beat the crap out of. Fast forward about 7 years, home from college and going to the grocery store for mom. Who should I see bagging my goodies but Zed? Taking a look at him, I see a horrible scar running from the top of his head down around the back of his skull and neck and under his shirt. His face lights up when he sees me, and he says in slightly slurred speech, "Hey, didn't we go to school together? We're friends from school, right?" He walks with me out to the parking lot, and as we walk, I learned that he had been hit by a car in high school while biking home one day. Accident required a half dozen surgeries, and it left Zed mentally impaired and a completely different person. He put my stuff in the car, shook my hand for a good 30 seconds, and kept asking me to, quote, come back and see me sometime. I had hated few people in my life to that point, and no one more than him. Almost cried driving home. I felt so bad for him and disgusted with myself for my previous hatred. I ran into somebody in high school that I used to pick on regularly when we were in 1st or 2nd grade. We recognized each other, and I walked up to him. We exchanged a few words, since I hadn't seen him in close to 10 years, and then didn't talk again. But right before we parted ways, I apologized for the way I treated him as a child. I couldn't stress how sorry I was for being a piece of crap to him for no other reason than I felt like it. I still occasionally think about him and where he's at in life. I work in a jail. I've seen the, quote, popular kids on the other side of the bars. I ran into my high school bully at a gay bar a few years back. He was my bottom that night. One of mine was this kid named Patrick. One incident led to 2 of my ribs being broken when he jumped on my chest with his knees. Another resulted in a broken eye socket after being kicked in the face by him and 2 of his friends. Eventually, I moved in with my father and didn't see any of my old bullies again, except for a few. Some have been relatively nice, and some are jerks. During high school, I took some martial arts classes, Taekwondo. I was always a larger kid, but too timid to fight back, but martial arts helped me to overcome that. Fast forward to a year or 2 after high school, and I go over to visit my mother. She had moved in with a real jerk who was into God knows what. And guess who's there? Patrick. He's now almost a foot shorter than me, skinny as a middle school girl, and was undoubtedly on meth. I later found out he also did heroin and a myriad of other drugs. We end up talking, and I tell him about how I have sinus trouble because of the beating I got from him and his friends. He laughed. I looked around at my younger brother, who had got very skinny from not eating, and sister, the environment they were in, and right then I made a decision. I turned to my mother and said, I don't give a crap if this is the kind of people you want to be around, indicating the piece of crap next to me, but we are leaving. So I piled my siblings in my car and brought them home with me. They They shortly moved in with my father officially and have been much better off since. Patrick made a comment about me, quote, disrespecting him and my mother, and I told him he had no respect for himself, obviously, so who is he to talk like that? He went to hit me and I just stared at him. He dropped his fist quick after I stared him down for what felt like an hour. TLDR, met middle school bully, he's a meth head, was living with my mother, took my siblings and left after verbally sparring with him. Feels good, man. Edit. Wow, this got a lot more karma than I thought. Didn't have time to write this up earlier, but to clear a few things up, he didn't bang my mother. I don't think. He was basically just there all the time like drug addicts are wont to do. My mother was living, and screwing, her boyfriend at the time, whose house it actually was. And the thought of snapping him like a twig did occur to me, but that paled in comparison to what he was doing to himself. If he didn't clean his ways up by now, he's likely dead or in prison. Beating the crap out of him wouldn't have made me feel any better. Plus, it's a lot easier on the knuckles. When I was a kid, I was fat. I used to get picked on all the time by this kid at church named Rusty. He was about 5 years older than me, and every couple of weeks, he would beat me up. I moved away when I was about 14, and thankfully, I didn't have to deal with him anymore. When I went to college, I decided to get my act together and get healthy. To that end, I started taking mixed martial arts. I did it for about 2 years and lost about 40 pounds. When I graduated, I moved back to where I was from and started looking for a new MMA gym. I went to the most reputable one, and who should be there but Rusty? It sounds too good to be true, but I swear to God it happened. He hadn't changed a bit. The first thing he said to me was, "Finally trying to learn to defend yourself, huh?" I had called ahead, and the instructor knew my deal and had arranged for me to come watch. I left my gear in the car. At the end of class, they do free rolling, jiu-jitsu sparring. Rusty comes up to me, having no knowledge that I am the least bit experienced, and starts begging the instructor to let him spar me, so he can, quote, show me the ropes. After all, he's been in MMA for 3 months now, and he never misses a UFC pay-per-view. I went outside and changed. Long story short, we sparred and I choked him out 3 times. Afterwards, I signed up for classes, he grabbed his bag, left, and never came back. This is my favorite story out of everything that has happened in my life thus far. I'm the only person I know that got to beat up my childhood bully as an adult. I was in need for an accountant job, so I searched several websites of businesses. I came across a very worthy company, so I wanted to apply. While I was filling out the form, I looked around the website some more and saw the name of the head chief of the company. I was depressed for the rest of the day. My high school bully who bullied me every day is now the head chief of his own freaking business. I'm an accountant. It doesn't always work out. This one is a classic. This girl used to torment me all through high school and middle school. Really went out of her way to tear me down. Whenever we had a class together, she would make her extreme dislike for me apparent. And, of course, other kids followed. I couldn't open my mouth without some kind of ridicule. Of course I was miserable, and my dad would try to cheer me up. Don't worry, kiddo. One day, she'll be working at a McDonald's and serving you fries. He actually referred to her as McDonald's for years. A couple years after graduating high school, I went to a Hardee's with my dad, and there was McDonald's behind the counter. I go out to place my order, and before I finish, she says, "You don't remember me, do you?" "Oh, I remember you." "Oh, so, would you like fries with that?" "Why, yes. Yes, I would." Way to go, Dad. Called it 9 years in advance. I had an evil 5th grade teacher who made my life terrible for a year. She even instigated a, quote, pick on Stoops day. I saw her at the bar where my friend worked. The day before this, we had invented a shot that tastes like urinal cake smell, Captain Morgan's Lime Bite mixed with Miller High Life. I bought my old teacher and her friends around from across the bar. I made eye contact and raised my shot of Wild Turkey. They gave me a curious look, but took the urinal cake shots nonetheless. My old teacher proceeded to throw up on the bar and get 86th from one of the only bars in town. Screw you, Mrs. Freeman! My sister has since become really good friends with her childhood tormentors. The sad part to me is that the reason she was able to patch things up was that she was a very late bloomer and ended up the kind of popular person they wanted to be friends with. I guess she kind of sold out and became friends with them. How on earth the topic never comes up amongst them, I do not know. Maybe it's her long-term plan to enact revenge, gain trust, destroy them, preferably by dumping pig's blood on their heads at a formal event of some kind. My dad is a very large man. We're talking 6'7", 300 pounds big. He would always tell me this story to cheer me up when girls would be jerks to me. He was pretty chubby in high school, so he played football and was good at it, but just really loved playing basketball. So his freshman year, he tried out for the team and didn't make it. The coach, who was a history teacher at the school, stated his weight as an issue. Fair enough. He worked hard to lose some weight over the summer, blah blah blah. Enter sophomore year. Ends up having the coach as his history teacher. Great, he thinks. He could be a good student and hopefully get on the team. Wrong. This adult man decided to call my father names related to his weight and harass him in front of the class. Not cool, but my dad was too proud and never said anything. Ended up making varsity his sophomore year because of a coaching change. Fast forward about 5 years. My dad was working as a bouncer at a bar in a nearby town to where he went to school. It was a regular night when who walks in? Jerk history teacher. Perfect. He thinks, I'll let it go, be professional, until he recognizes my dad as, quote, the chubby kid who was a coward. My dad looks at him and says, Sir, I think you've had too much to drink. It's time for you to go home. The coach is saying, No, I'm fine, etc., etc. My dad grabs him by the shirt and says, No, it's time for you to step outside. You've had too much to drink. The coach decides to swing at my dad, and that's when he loses it. He states, This is for all the kids you called fat, you piece of crap, and proceeds to beat the tar out of him. A long story, I know, but my favorite by far. My dad and his old bouncer friends always tell it when they got together, too. Revenge. Content warning, this one's pretty violent. My dad did something similar. He grew up as a poorish farm boy in Ireland. All he ever wanted to do was sing in the church Christmas Day show. He bought himself a guitar and taught himself to play, but his headmaster at school wouldn't let him, or any of the family for that matter, perform in it. Fast forward about 30 years, we are back in Ireland for my grandfather's funeral, and we walk into my cousin's pub, and sitting at the bar is this old man. I had never seen my dad so angry before in my life. His face was purple with anger at the sight of this guy. He decked this old man so hard he knocked him off his bar stool and onto his back. My dad crouched down inches from his face and said, Get out before I punch you for every boy you laid eyes on. This old man looked like he was going to crap himself and ran out of there as fast as he could. I was mortified and felt awful for this old man until my dad told me what this man was doing. He was touching the boys from school. He would take his picks and basically cycle through them as he saw fit. The boys not being touched didn't get away easy either. They were hit with the shillelagh until they bled. My dad hated this man and says that had he found him when he was a drinking man, he may have killed him. TLDR, my dad decked an old man for kitty-diddling his friends. This is kind of morbid. In the 6th grade, I was friends with this kid. I remember one day telling him about an episode of Rescue 911 that I saw, where a guy was driving an ATV in a field and didn't see that there was a barbed wire. Fast forward a year, and this kid started to make really mean comments about me. He would make fun of my appearance and how my family had no money in front of everyone. I'm from an immigrant family, and he would always tell me to go back to my country. Middle school was really tough on me because of kids like him, but held back from fighting him because I knew nothing good would come from it. Fast forward to the summer after high school graduation, that kid was driving an ATV in a field, didn't see the barbed wire, and was decapitated. Weird that 7 years prior, I had described to my future tormentor exactly how he will die. I've got 2. I was picked on a lot. About 10 years ago, I got a temporary job at Kroger. It was just stocking shelves, and I had another restaurant job lined up, but needed something for about 2 months while I went through a lengthy hiring process there. Spoiler, I wound up getting an even better job elsewhere and wound up never taking that. So, I go to get my check on my first payday at Kroger and find out the manager at the front is one of the guys who used to bully the crap out of me in high school. He made small talk for a minute. Hey, how you been? Good to see you. He clearly remembered. Once everyone walked away, he leaned in and said, Hey, deprecated zero, I'm really sorry for all the crap I did to you in school. I was a stupid jerk kid. I smiled, held out my hand, thanked him, and told him it's all in the past. That was really cool. The other is less cool but hilarious to me. This girl was, quote, the prom queen, basically. The stereotypical mean girl dating the football player. My opinion of her was always that she was just spoiled, worthless, and dumb. I don't usually take joy in other people's misfortune, but I felt schadenfreude in unparalleled amounts the day I walked into Buffalo Wild Wings and saw her standing behind the counter. This is maybe 10 years out of high school. She looks exactly the same. Put on some weight maybe, but hair still done the same. She still looks like she got Effie Trinket to do her makeup, so on. You could tell at a glance that she's never mentally moved past 8th grade. I asked how she'd been, tried to politely talk to her because, hey, I want people to do well. She was a jerk. Was like, "Ew, you're deprecated 0. I just raised my eyebrows at her and let it go. Long story short, her boss was my roommate. I asked him about her. Single mother, just got kicked out of her mom's house. He just hired her like 2 weeks earlier. He confronted her about talking down to customers and wound up firing her. Felt like justice. I lucked out and didn't really garner any enemies while in middle school and high school. Mostly because I was the poor kid at a snobby private school in Nashville, Tennessee, until I moved in 9th grade and nobody would talk to me. There was this one really obnoxious boy in one of my classes in 7th grade though, treated everyone like handmaids, but the parents had money, so nothing was ever really done about it. Ran across his Facebook page the other day. His parents just bought him his second Lamborghini because he wrecked the first one. I try not to hold animosity towards anyone, but I hope somebody keys his car. I was working in a video rental store in Houston, circa 1989, about 2 years after I graduated high school. In comes a girl that had always been awful to me from 10th grade to graduation. She would cross a room just to say something mean, and I had no history with this girl at all. I had never actually said a word to her. All our exchanges were just her saying something mean to me. I didn't even know her last name. I must have reminded her of someone. She comes into the store and sheepishly said that she wanted 3 dirty movies. She didn't seem to remember me. She said her best friend was getting married and she wanted some dirty movies for the bachelorette party. The shop had a small adult room that you had to access by coming behind the counter, but she didn't want to go in there. She asked me to select 3 films. She was squirming with embarrassment as I tried to find out what she was, quote, into, and kind of acted like I thought the films were for her and her alone. She said, "Just grab 3 good ones, I don't care." So I selected 3, all lesbian adult films, and she slunk out with them. I would have loved to see the look on their faces when they popped those tapes in. She returned them through the night drop so she wouldn't have to look anyone in the eye when she brought them back. She rented on her parents' account. I sent a notice through the mail to her parents that, quote, Mona's 3-way slit party had been returned damaged and they owed us $30. Met a kid that was an absolute brute in high school. Thought he was tough stuff. I think I only went face to face with him once over some dumb crap about him threatening a friend of mine. No real fight ever came from it, but he was definitely an enemy. Met him randomly in an airport halfway across the country maybe 4 years after high school. He was the nicest guy. The Marines beat the stupid right out of him. I was playing poker in Atlantic City about 7 years ago, and one of the guys that bullied me, Chad, sat at my table. There's no way he recognized me. I was actually playing on a no-limit hold'em table while waiting for a seat to open in a 2-way high-low game. Anyway, I stayed at the NLHE table just to take his money. I played probably 95% of the pots he was in. He was pretty drunk and wasn't very good. I got close to $600 off of him in a little over an hour before he decided to quit. I have no idea what he does for a living, but I am 100% sure he is a big loser when he plays cards. Military personnel of Reddit. What's the best, weirdest, or funniest punishment you've seen handed down by a superior? USMC boot. One kid on Firewatch failed to notice the DI coming on deck, which means you immediately salute and report your post. So the DI ran up to the rifle rack, smacked it, and yelled, "Bam! You're dead." He tried to respond, but was cut off by the DI. "You're a ghost now. You can't talk. Go act like a ghost." Then the kid had to wander around the squad bay for the rest of his 2-hour Firewatch acting like a ghost, and he took that responsibility with stride. Plenty of ridiculous, "Ooh, I'm a ghost" noises and screwing with people's racks. We were all laughing our butts off for the next hour till our senior got mad. Here's another one that happened to me. An SDI from the squad bay above us told us that whenever he comes on deck and we call the greeting, we all have to squat until he tells us to get up. So we do. Now, one day, I'm out doing gear guard with a buddy. Apparently, the SDI came on deck and told everyone to stop squatting. Coming back from gear guard, I didn't know that. He comes on deck, I squat, and no one else is. I look around. I crack a smile, and that was the oh crap moment. Though, instead of just getting smoked, he told me he wanted me to sing. Side straddle hops and mountain climbers, Marine Corps push-ups, double timers, while doing the exercises I was singing. The tune, the wheels on the bus go round and round. So it goes into the duty hut and I start. At first I was quiet and wasn't into it, but I decided, screw it, let's go for it. So for the next 20 minutes, approximately, I was belching out wheels on the bus go round and round with those lyrics as loud as I could sing it while doing those exercises. The rest of my platoon was cleaning rifles. Everyone freaking lost it after a few minutes, even the DIs. All three of them covered their faces and just stood there laughing. It was amazing, and a really, really good workout. I was exhausted. Marine Boot Camp. We had a guy that somehow got his watch through the in-dock. They take all your crap when you first get there. Well, the DIs found out he had it when they saw him wearing it one day, so they put him in the squad bay trash can and put the lid on it. Every time they walked by and kicked it, he'd pop out with his watch and yell, "Sir, the time on deck is 09:45!" and then go back into his can like the freaking Grouch from Sesame Street. It was really, really hard not to laugh at that. During my first deployment to Iraq as a 50 cal gunner, I had a salty sergeant for a team leader. Dude had been at the tip of the spear for the Iraq invasion, been to Baghdad in 2005, and now he was back for his third time in 2007. Not only was he intimidating, but he knew how to discipline your butt if you stepped out of line. I was a stupid, young, private first class with about a year in the army. I knew what was right and what was wrong, and thankfully, was able to get on his good side. Our driver though, nuh-uh. He was a short, stupid specialist with a crustache who recently did 4 years in Korea. This dude was so off, he even re-enlisted for it when his first stint was over. Dude was just freaking weird and gross. Always had an excuse for everything, nothing was ever his fault. He loved trying to pass the blame down my way, mostly because he outranked me. Our sergeant normally knew what was up and corrected him accordingly. Well, during a convoy security mission one day in southern Iraq, he hit a pothole. Like, a big one. Probably 20 foot long by 20 foot wide. Our sergeant flips out, asking what the heck he was doing. The driver tries blaming it on me, saying I never let him know it was there. Since I was the gunner, I had to make everything aware to him because I was the eyes and ears. The sergeant chews him out, saying it was the driver's fault he didn't avoid the pothole since I was up top scanning for threats. We were the lead vehicle, so it's not like this pothole was obscured by anything, especially since it was in broad daylight. The driver then starts saying, "I don't know, Sergeant. I couldn't see it because I'm short." He wasn't that short. Guy was maybe 5'7", give or take an inch. He wasn't paying attention, and that's what the sergeant wanted to hear, because it was the truth. Well, this irritates the heck out of our sergeant, and he calls for the entire convoy, something like 20 semis, 6 Humvees, and 2 M111-7 ASVs, to halt. He then tells me to pass down an empty 50 caliber can. I do so with a quickness. The sergeant then passes the can to the driver and makes him use it as a booster seat. The driver protests, then my sergeant gives him a direct order to do so. The driver backs down and does it. At every gate to every base we approached, my sergeant made the driver open the door and show every guard what he was sitting on. Then, he was forced to sing, "I'm a little teapot, me, oh my, I sit on a high chair so we don't blow up and die." Most of the guards just laughed their butts off. A few radioed for other guards to come see it. He was the laughingstock of our battalion for months. A recruit in USMC boot camp thought he was special because he was an Eagle Scout. The drill instructor picked up on this, and during PT, took him into the woods and made him build a nest. Then, he had to squat over it in order to keep his eggs warm. When we were heading to Iraq, we had to pass through Kuwait. Kuwait, being the transient hub for soldiers heading to and leaving Iraq, it is very chaotic. As a result of jet lag and the chaotic nature of Kuwait, my buddy had brought his weapon to the shower, but forgot to grab it on his way back to the tent. Shortly after he left, a sergeant came bursting through the door to see him sitting on his cot, messing around with his new video camera he had just purchased to bring on the deployment. His punishment was to get up, take his weapon and camera, and go sit in the community shower area and make sure no one else leaves their weapon in the shower for the night. So, what would you see when you went to take off your clothes to get in the shower was a fully dressed guy with a video camera just sitting there looking at you. There was a time when we made a private sweep all the sunshine off the sidewalks. It took the poor guy all day. One of the first days in basic, a guy in my platoon was standing at attention while having his room inspected by the instructor. It didn't matter how nice his room was because there was a large piece of fuzz/fluff on his shirt that immediately drew the sergeant's attention. Imagine a female French-Canadian sergeant with this accent. "Recruit Bloggins, what is that on your shirt? Is it a fluffy?" "Yes, Sergeant. Why is there a fluffy on your shirt, Bloggins?" "I must have missed it, Sergeant." "Missed it? It is so huge. How did you miss such a big fluffy?" She picks it off of him. "Hold out your hand." He holds out his hand and she places it in his palm. "This is Mr. Fluffy. Find a home for him, like a pill bottle or something. From now on, whenever I want to see Mr. Fluffy, you must bring him to me." And so, for the rest of basic, every time the sergeant found a piece of fuzz, she would yell out, "Mr. Fluffy!" And Bloggins would have to march over to her and present Mr. Fluffy, and she would formally hand him the new piece of fuzz to add to Mr. Fluffy. There was heck to pay if he didn't have Mr. Fluffy with him at all times. Week 1 in Army basic training, we had a soldier ask for an omelet in chow line, which was not allowed because there was absolutely no time to make custom omelets for every single basic training soldier. The cook started making the omelet when a drill sergeant asked what the heck was going on. The basic training soldier replied, "Go around, drill sergeant, I'm waiting on an omelet." Needless to say, this was the wrong thing to say and do week 1 in basic training. Our platoon motto was henceforth, "Go around, drill sergeant, I'm waiting on an omelet." And the basic training soldier was henceforth named Private Omelet. In the Marine Corps, when we really screwed up, we would go, quote, fishing. It is where you squat down like you're sitting in a chair and hold a shovel out in front of you in the air like a fishing pole. Then, you just sit there for a long time, and if the shovel would start to droop down, my sergeant would grab the tip of the shovel and start to shake it and make me pretend I was reeling in the big one. One time, me and a buddy got in trouble together, so they made him fish and me flop around on the deck like a fish he had already caught for almost an hour. "Now jump on the deck and flop like a fish! SpongeBob SquarePants!" We were deployed in Iraq, and a guy was peeing in water bottles instead of walking to the bathroom at night. This is a common thing, but this guy wasn't getting rid of the bottles. He'd keep them underneath his cot for some reason. When the first sergeant found this out, he made the guy report to the commander while holding all of his pee bottles in a box in front of him. They tore into this guy while he was holding a box of his own urine. Guy in basic dropped the biggest turd you've ever seen in the commode. So he shows the drill sergeants, who then make him suit up in full combat gear, weapon and all, and guard it all night. The whole, "Halt! Who goes there?" Pretty amusing. Navy basic training. All of us are doing push-ups. When the instructor says down, everyone counts. When the instructor says up, one guy in particular, the screw-up, is told to shout, "Would you like fries with that?" The instructor told him to get used to it because that's what he's going to be saying for the rest of his life. Down. 1. Up. Would you like fries with that? Down. 2. Up. Would you like fries with that? There was a pool of tears from laughter on the floor below me. I wrote a bad check while stationed in Korea. $2.06 over the limit. My punishment? To cut the parade field grass with scissors by morning. Had to cut the PT field with scissors along with 3 other guys because while we were buffing the floors, one of them somehow managed to get a candy bar and it fell out of his pocket in front of a drill. Everyone just froze and stared at the Snickers. It's like seeing a bus come at you in slow motion. You can't move, you can't speak, you just watch. Edit: candy is strictly forbidden, along with sodas, snack foods, laptops, phones, etc. Your only belongings are what you are issued minus stationery and, depending on the drills you have, photos. For 3 or 4 months, you only eat what they feed you and you only do what they tell you. The food though? Good lord, the food. Breakfast was freaking awesome, and dinner was usually extremely filling. You didn't go hungry at all. Since you signed on that dotted line, you signed away all privileges for 3 months. I was in a gender mixed company in basic. The 3rd floor of the barracks was split with females on one half and males on the other. Males were not allowed in the female half and vice versa. My platoon was out back practicing throwing grenade bodies, and a window on the female side of the 3rd floor opened, and a male sneaked out of the window onto the ledge. It was immediately obvious to everyone, including our drill sergeant, that he had been in there messing around with the female, and a drill sergeant must have come down the hall, forcing him to get out onto the ledge so he wouldn't get caught. Our drill sergeant looked at the guy for a minute and then yelled, really sarcastically, "Don't do it, Private. You have lots to live for." Then they put him on self-unalive watch and made him hand over his belts and tie and shoelaces and everything that he could hang himself with, and made him drag his newly bare mattress out into the hallway next to the fire guard desk and sleep out there every night until we graduated 4 weeks later. And they made his battle buddy sleep on the floor next to him for the first week. TLDR, male cop messing around with female, treated like potential self-unalive for remaining month of BCT. Officers can't punish soldiers with any punishment that doesn't follow guidelines. That said, they could be ordered some stupid things. My friend got ordered to move a box weighing about 50 pounds from the barracks to the shower every 2 minutes for 2 hours. The officer's reason for it was because he didn't know where to put it and was trying to decide if it should be at the barracks or the shower. In the end, he ended up telling him to load it up in the truck. Having to apply suntan lotion to a crap ton of large rocks so they, quote, don't get sunburned, then having to flip every rock and reapply as needed. I once spent 12 hours cleaning screens on windows. That doesn't sound bad, does it? Try this. Find a small wire about the same gauge as the holes in your window screen. Gently push the wire through the hole in the screen to make sure that the hole is empty. Repeat for 3 minutes, then look away from the screen. Anything weird with your eyes? Try it for hours. Had a guy in a warehouse drop a pallet load of assorted nuts and bolts off a forklift. Boxes broke open, 100,000 little nuts and bolts everywhere of various sizes. He had to sweep them into a pile, repair the boxes, fit each nut to a screw to make sure of the size. The pile was then inspected, then he had to remove each nut from the screw and place the screw in the proper box, then place the nut in the proper box. Probably 25 or 50 per box, I don't remember. Doesn't sound too bad, right? Took 3 12-hour days. He wasn't allowed to sit down. He had to bend over at the waist, pick up a tiny nut and screw, straighten up, screw them together, then bend over for another. More than 100,000 times. Think about it. During an inspection and basic training, a piece of lint was found in our dryer. I ordered to, quote, handcuff the intruder and construct a detention facility where the intruder could be interrogated. I was to have an in-depth report on who he was, where he was from, and what he was doing in the building. My grandfather, who was a Korea veteran, had a story about a guy who kept getting things taken away from him as punishment. Apparently, before it was over, he had no socks or shoelaces, no underwear, and they took the inside part of his helmet. My brother told me that when he was in basic, a drill sergeant yelled at this guy to, quote, beat his face, meaning to do push-ups. Said guy had no clue it meant that, and promptly punched himself in the face really, really hard and fell to the ground. The drill sergeant had to walk that one off, and my brother said you could hear him laughing hysterically as he walked behind a building. Not totally relevant, but I figured I'd share. Drill was smoking us one morning, and one of the other boots kept making karate sounds on the up on the push-ups. Drill was down with us, so he'd shout, down, hold it, to the left, and up, and you'd hear, hi-ya, in a long, low, guttural grunt. Eventually, everyone is laughing, including the drill, at the up sounds. Finally, he collapses in a fit of giggles and shouts, I hate all you suckers. Then he walks over to the other drill, who is snickering, and says, I quit. I can't smoke these suckers if they make me laugh. Didn't see him until after chow. Another from basic was, a private was caught walking to the showers without wearing his clothes, just holding his towel and walking nude. The showers were in the same bay, and it was just males in the bay. But a female drill from another platoon came in and saw him and made him drop and give 50 push-ups while nude. A buddy of mine had a DI that would make anyone who did anything stupid chug a smart water, quote, in case it helps. A guy I worked with had a habit of falling asleep at his desk. He was a real scumbag. Unfortunately, he was also a 1-star general's son. They made him sit at his desk with one of those exercise yoga ball things. the sucker still fell asleep, but he would hit his head on the desk or fall over. He also decided to tell his supervisor he had an appointment, but instead took a nap in his room. They called the cops on him and had him arrested for dereliction of duty. Fun stuff. Got caught in basic with my iPod, and I ran around the camp for near 2 hours with my iPod over my head, shouting, "I'm a stupid jerk for bringing my iPod in the field," as the quote, enemy was attacking our camp. I then proceeded to put my iPod in a plastic bag, then taped it onto my helmet, and from there on, I responded to private iPod. When my instructor shouted play, I had to sing, skip, I had to switch songs, etc. It lasted 2 weeks. Even during the night when I had 1 to 2 hours to sleep. Throwaway to protect the innocent. I was once in the Navy, stationed at Kings Bay, a Navy submarine and training base in rural southern Georgia, USA, a stone's throw away from Florida. Due to this base may or may not contain nuclear weapons, there is a Marine Security Detachment/Battalion/something stationed there as well. The majority of these poor sods were just out of Marine kill camp and were hot and heavy to go off to Middle Eastistan and quote, shoot them some towel heads. Unfortunately, they'd landed themselves in a swamp in rural southern Georgia. Needless to say, they typically made very poor choices. Their superiors, however, normally disciplined them well. Amongst the punishments I witnessed were the following. Number 1. A group of Marines had decided to play soccer with an armadillo, killing it. They were forced to perform a full military funeral for the poor creature, then stand honor guard at its grave for a week, 24/7, in full dress uniform, in the middle of the summer. Remember, this is in a swamp in southern Georgia. Number 2. I happened to be out early one Sunday morning, chain smoking and drinking coffee outside of the Navy barracks, when an interesting sight came by. There were 13 Marines. 12 of them were running and carrying a telephone pole on their shoulders, 6 in front, 6 in back. The 13th man was in the middle of the pole, hanging from it, doing pull-ups, as the telephone pole was being carried by the other 12 running Marines. After a certain number of pull-ups, he would swap with one of the carriers. Number 3. Speaking of, this base may or may not contain nuclear weapons. The Marines had to do regular patrols, driving slowly around in Humvees or armored cars around the storage bunkers and the base at large. Apparently, there was a problem with the Marines in the vehicles falling asleep and running off the road. A brilliant NCO had the following great idea. Only one Marine would be in the vehicle, whilst the other Marine would be running behind it. If the vehicle were to start swaying off the road, the runner would awaken his driver comrade and they'd swap. It didn't take long, however, for this plan to fail. Patrol vehicle went off the road, crashed, and the Marine running stayed the course, smacking into the back of the vehicle and rendering himself unconscious. Some idiot gun bunny didn't check pressures before they took their piece out onto the field. Instead of being smart and zipping his lip, he said something stupid to the master gunny about the cooler temperatures causing the pressure to drop. For 13 hours the next day, he had to deflate every tire on every artillery piece, refill them to spec with a hand pump, and if anyone asked him what the heck he was doing, he had to yell, "I am replacing the summer air in the tires with fresh winter air!" When you subscribe, make sure to hit the bell to turn on notifications. Put the playlist on in the background to finish listening to all the stories, linked at the top of the description. And if you like Am I the Genius, give Am I the Jerk a shot, linked in the description too. Either way, thanks a lot for watching, and we'll see you guys next time.